Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. The main character, after dying, he wakes up inside of Marvel and realizes he has a bunch of Latern ranks. He decides to create the Latern Corp inside of Marvel. What will the Latern Corp do inside of Marvel? Who's gonna join?
Marvel, what if I have all Latern stones? Create Latern Corp. Chapter 1, Stones Under Fluorescent Light. The last thing I remember from my old life was the sound of something cracking, a dull impact at the back of my skull, and then nothing. No lingering feeling. No slow fade. Just a sudden stop. When awareness returned, it did not come gently. I was lying on a cold, smooth floor. My back pressed flat against it, arms splayed slightly away from my sides. The air smelled clean, almost sterile, like polished metal and recycled ventilation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and unbroken. I blinked several times, my eyes stinging as they adjusted. I sat up slowly and rubbed the side of my head. No pain. No blood. My body felt intact, younger than I remembered, stronger. I exhaled once, steady, and took in my surroundings. They were arranged in a wide semicircle in front of me. 7 stones. Each one hovered a few inches above a simple black pedestal. They were smooth, polished, and unmistakable. Green, yellow, blue, red, indigo, violet, orange. Latern power stones. My mouth opened slightly before I noticed it. I let out a quiet breath and closed it again, my expression settling into something calm. My pulse stayed even. I did not panic. I did not doubt what I was seeing. I pushed myself to my feet and stepped closer. The green stone pulsed faintly, its light stable and controlled. The yellow one beside it flickered with a sharper rhythm. The red stone glowed hotter, brighter, as if resisting stillness. Each color behaved exactly as it should. No deviation. No distortion. This is new, I said quietly, my voice steady and conversational. I turned my head and scanned the rest of the room. It was large, circular, with smooth metal walls that curved upward into the ceiling. No windows. No visible doors. The floor was unmarked, unscuffed, as if nothing had ever been dragged across it. The room felt constructed, not natural. Deliberate. I crouched near the pedestals and examined the symbols etched faintly into their bases. They were the insignias of the Latern Corps. Every one of them was exact. I straightened and let out a short breath through my nose, something close to a quiet laugh. All of them, I said. Not subtle. I turned away from the stones and noticed a small metal table near the far wall. On it lay a folded newspaper, its edges crisp. That caught my attention more than the stones had. I walked over, picked it up, and unfolded it. The headline was large and bold. Stark Industries CEO Tony Stark missing in Afghanistan. I scanned the article quickly. The date sat just beneath the title. Everything clicked into place. Marvel. Early timeline. Before Iron Man. Before suits and public reveals. Before half the disasters I knew were coming. I lowered the paper slowly and exhaled again. All right, I said. That tracks. I placed the newspaper back on the table and leaned my hands against its surface. My reflection stared back faintly from the polished metal. The face was unfamiliar but healthy. Dark hair. Clear eyes. No visible scars. I looked like someone in his early 20s. I straightened and turned back toward the stones. I had full knowledge of what was going to happen in this world. I knew who would live. Who would die. What would go wrong. What could be prevented. I also knew that Latern power did not exist here. Yet. I walked back to the pedestals and stopped in front of the green stone. I stared at it for several seconds, my expression thoughtful but relaxed. Creating a lantern core here is going to be work, I said. But it's doable. I reached out and picked up the green stone. The moment my fingers wrapped around it, warmth spread through my hand and up my arm. Not painful. Not overwhelming. Familiar. The stone reacted to me immediately, its light stabilizing further, bright but controlled. I nodded once. Good, I said. A simple green ring formed around the stone, metal shaping itself smoothly around my finger. It settled on my right hand, index finger, snug but comfortable. I slipped the ring on without ceremony. Green light flared outward in a controlled burst, filling the room for less than a second before collapsing back into the ring. The hum of the room deepened slightly, then returned to normal. I flexed my hand and watched the light respond. No resistance. No instability. Functional, I said. No calibration needed. I looked back at the other stones, still hovering patiently. One thing at a time, I said to them. The room shifted around me without warning. The floor dissolved into light, and the walls folded away in silence. There was no sensation of falling. No disorientation. Just a brief flash, and then solid ground beneath my feet again. I stood in an alley. Concrete walls rose on either side, stained with grime and old posters. A dumpster sat near the far end, lid half open. The sound of distant traffic filtered in from the street beyond. It was night. The air was cool. I glanced down at my hand. The ring was still there. All right, I said. I stepped out of the alley and onto the sidewalk. Neon signs buzzed overhead. A few pedestrians walked past, bundled in jackets, not paying me any attention. Cars rolled by at a steady pace. New York City. I smiled faintly and adjusted the collar of my jacket, which I had not noticed until now. It fit comfortably. Plain. No markings. I walked. As I moved, I let my awareness expand slightly through the ring. Not projecting constructs. Not scanning deeply. Just enough to feel the world around me. It responded easily. Power flowed cleanly. No interference. No competing energies. This universe accepted the ring without resistance. That makes things easier, I said quietly. I stopped at a street corner where a small convenience store glowed under fluorescent lights. The television inside played a news broadcast. I stepped in and stood near the entrance, watching. The anchor spoke calmly. Continuing coverage on the disappearance of billionaire industrialist Tony Stark. Stark Industries has released a statement. I listened for a minute, then turned away. I did not need more confirmation. I left the store and continued walking until I found a quieter street. I leaned against a brick wall and crossed my arms, my posture loose. My expression stayed light, but my thoughts moved quickly. Tony Stark was currently captive. He would build the Mark I suit soon. He would escape. Obadiah Stane would betray him. Iron Man would reveal himself publicly. I had no intention of interfering with that directly. Stark needed to become who he was going to become. That path mattered. The Lantern Corps would be something else. Parallel. Separate. A new force that did not replace what already existed. I pushed off the wall and straightened. First step is structure, I said. Second step is candidates. I lifted my hand slightly and let the ring project a faint green interface in front of me. Simple shapes. Data streams. Nothing anyone nearby could see. I began outlining criteria. Willpower was not rare in this world, but it manifested differently. Soldiers. Scientists. Doctors. Ordinary people under pressure. I would not rush it. I lowered my hand and started walking again. A sharp sound echoed from an alley ahead. Raised voices. One angry. One scared. I sighed softly, more out of habit than concern. Timing, I said. I turned the corner and saw 3 men crowding around a fourth. The fourth was younger, pressed back against a wall, hands raised. One of the men held a knife. I stepped closer, my footsteps audible. Hey, I said, tone easy. That's not necessary. All 3 turned toward me. One frowned. Get lost, he said. I glanced at the knife, then back at him. No, I said calmly. The man with the knife took a step toward me. I lifted my hand. A simple green barrier formed between us, solid and transparent. The man collided with it and stumbled back, swearing. The other 2 froze. Their expressions shifted from anger to confusion to fear in the span of a second. Go, I said, nodding down the street. Now. They did not argue. They ran. The younger man stared at me, breathing hard. Are you okay? I asked. He nodded quickly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think so. Good, I said. I lowered my hand, and the barrier dissolved. Go home. He hesitated, then nodded again and hurried away. I watched him go, then turned back toward the street. That's enough for tonight, I said. I walked until I found a rooftop access door and took the stairs up. The city spread out below me, lights stretching in every direction. The air was colder up here. I stood near the edge and rested my hands on the railing. This world was loud. Busy. Full of people who would never stop moving forward, even when everything went wrong. It would need more than heroes in armor. I glanced at the ring again. Tomorrow, I said. We start properly. I stood there for a while, watching traffic move below, my expression relaxed, my posture loose, my thoughts already organizing the work ahead. Chapter 2, A Kid from Queens. I stayed on the rooftop longer than necessary. The city kept moving whether I watched it or not. Sirens came and went. Trains rattled in the distance. The ring stayed quiet on my finger, steady, waiting. Peter Parker was alive somewhere in this city. Not Spider-Man. Not yet. Just a kid. 15 years old. Smart. Awkward. Living with Aunt May and Uncle Ben in Queens. No powers. No mask. No webbing. No idea how much weight would eventually land on his shoulders. I pushed off the railing and straightened, brushing my hands together once. My mood stayed light, but my focus sharpened. This was not about changing him. This was about positioning. Observation. Understanding the ground before anything else happened. I lifted my hand slightly and projected a simple construct, a faint green map hovering just above my palm. Borough lines. Streets. Transit routes. Data flowed cleanly, pulled from public infrastructure and passive scans. I did not touch anything private. No invasive sweeps. No interference. Queens, I said quietly. I dismissed the construct and stepped back toward the stairwell. Walking felt right. No rushing. No flying. This world already had enough people dropping out of the sky. The subway ride was uneventful. I stood near the door, one hand on the pole, the other relaxed at my side. People filled the car. Students with backpacks. Workers half asleep. A couple arguing quietly near the far end. Nobody paid me any attention. I got off near Forest Hills and walked. The neighborhood was quieter than Manhattan. Rows of houses. Trees lining the sidewalks. Streetlights casting even pools of light. It was late, but not silent. I checked the address once in my head. I did not need the ring for that. I had memorized it years ago in another life. I stopped across the street from a modest house. 2 stories. Brick front. Lights on in the living room. Curtains drawn but not fully closed. "That's it," I said under my breath. I leaned against a lamppost and crossed my arms, posture casual. I was not here to knock. Not here to talk. Not yet. This was about seeing. Confirming. A silhouette moved behind the curtain. Shorter. Slight. Quick movements. Peter. I felt a small flicker of something in my chest. Not heavy. Not sad. Just awareness. "Still normal," I said quietly. The front door opened. Aunt May stepped out onto the porch, pulling a cardigan tighter around herself. She looked tired but composed, the way she always did. She glanced down the street, then back inside. "Peter," she called, her voice firm but warm. "It's late." "Coming," he replied from inside. His voice cracked slightly, "Still young." She smiled faintly and stepped back inside, closing the door. I watched the light flick off in the living room a moment later. I stayed another few minutes, just listening to the quiet. No danger. No disturbances. Everything exactly where it should be. "All right," I said softly. "That's enough for tonight." I pushed off the lamppost and walked away, hands in my pockets, expression relaxed. The next few days passed without incident. I took a small room in a cheap motel in Queens. Cash handled quietly. No records tied to anything important. The ring made that easy without drawing attention. I kept my presence low. Civilian clothes. No constructs in public. During the day, I walked. I learned the rhythm of the neighborhood. Which delis opened early? Which streets stayed busy? Which corners kids gathered on after school? I saw Peter twice more, always at a distance. Once, he walked home with a backpack slung over one shoulder, talking animatedly to a friend about something scientific. His hands moved as he spoke, excitement obvious. His friend nodded along, only half understanding. I smiled slightly and kept walking. Another time, I saw him on the bus, standing near the back, headphones on, tapping his foot. He looked tired. Normal tired. School tired. I did not approach. I spent the evenings on rooftops, reviewing timelines in my head. Corp. Kurt Connors. The spider. The field trip. The bite. Everything was still weeks away. Maybe months. Plenty of time. On the 4th night, something changed. I was walking past a small grocery store when I heard raised voices inside. Nothing extreme. Just irritation. A cashier arguing with a customer. I slowed my pace, listening. "You're short," the cashier said, sounding annoyed. "I gave you a 20, the man replied. "You rang it wrong." "I rang it fine," she said. I stepped inside and glanced at the register. Simple math. She had miscounted. "He's right," I said pleasantly. "You missed 2 items." Both of them looked at me. The cashier frowned, then checked the screen again. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "Oh," she said. "Yeah. Okay." The man relaxed and took his change. "Thanks," he said to me. "No problem," I replied. I stepped back outside and continued down the street. Moments like that mattered. Small things. Trust built quietly. Later that night, I felt something through the ring. Not a threat. Just movement. Familiar. I looked up. Peter was on a rooftop across the street from where I stood, sitting near the edge with his legs dangling. He held a notebook in his hands, flipping through pages under the dim light from a nearby window. I stopped walking and leaned against the building behind me, careful to stay in shadow. He did not see me. He muttered to himself as he read, scratching something out and rewriting it. His expression shifted between frustration and focus. I felt a faint pulse of amusement. "Studying never stops," I said quietly. He closed the notebook with a sigh and leaned back on his hands, staring up at the sky. His shoulders slumped slightly. I watched him for several minutes. He was thinking about something heavy. Grades. Money. Responsibility. Things kids should not have to carry alone, but often did. He stood and climbed back down through a window, closing it behind him. I waited a moment longer, then moved on. A week later, I made my first deliberate adjustment. I followed Peter after school, keeping my distance. He walked alone this time, backpack heavy, posture slightly hunched. A group of older kids lingered near a corner ahead, laughing loudly. Flash Thompson stood with them. Flash noticed Peter and smirked. He stepped into Peter's path. "Hey, Parker," Flash said, grinning. "You finish my homework yet?" Peter stopped. His jaw tightened. "No," he said. "I'm not doing it for you." Flash stepped closer. "Come on. You owe me." I watched carefully. This was normal. This happened often. It would not escalate too far. Not today. Still, I walked closer, unhurried. Flash shoved Peter lightly. Peter stumbled back a step, catching himself. "That's enough," I said calmly. All of them turned toward me. Flash frowned. "Who are you?" "Just someone walking," I replied easily. "You're blocking the sidewalk." One of Flash's friends snorted. "Mind your business." "It is," I said, still relaxed. "Public space." Flash looked at me for a second longer, then scoffed. "Whatever," he said. He turned back to Peter. "Later, Parker." They walked off, laughing. Peter stood still for a moment, then adjusted his backpack strap and started walking again. I fell into step beside him, matching his pace. "You okay?" I asked, tone casual. He glanced at me, surprised. "Yeah," he said. "I'm fine." "Good," I said. "That guy's loud." He huffed quietly. "You have no idea." I smiled slightly. "I have some idea." We walked in silence for a few steps. "Thanks," he said, not looking at me. "No problem," I replied. "I'm Alex." "Peter," he said. "I know," I thought, but I did not say it. "Nice to meet you, Peter," I said instead. "You live around here?" he asked. "For now," I said cheerfully. He nodded and glanced at his house ahead. "This is me," he said. "All right," I replied. "Have a good night." "You too," he said. He headed inside. I stopped at the end of the block and watched the door close. My expression stayed light, but my shoulders eased slightly. "Contact established," I said quietly. I walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a familiar face without becoming important. I ran into Peter occasionally. At the bus stop. At the deli. Once at the library. Short conversations. Nothing deep. Nothing heavy. He talked about school. About science club. About trying to help Aunt May with bills. I listened. I nodded. I joked lightly when it fit. "You ever think about taking a break?" I asked once. He shrugged. Can't really afford to. Fair, I said. I never mentioned power. Never mentioned responsibility. Never mentioned anything that did not belong to this moment in his life. The ring stayed silent. Then, one afternoon, I felt a sharp spike of recognition. Corp buses were parked outside Midtown High. I stopped across the street and watched students line up. Permission slips in hand. Teachers counting heads. Peter stood near the back, talking excitedly to another student. The field trip. My posture straightened. My mood shifted, just slightly. Not tense. Focused. All right, I said quietly. This is it. I did not follow them. I did not intervene. I did not go anywhere near Oscorp. I turned and walked away. Some things had to happen. That night, I stood on a rooftop again, watching the city breathe. The ring hummed faintly, responding to my attention. Peter Parker would not be alone when his world changed. He would not know why. He would not need to. That was enough. I rested my hands on the railing and looked out over Queens, my expression easy, my thoughts already moving to the next steps. Chapter 3, Names, Faces, Locations. I stayed in Queens after the field trip, but I kept my distance the way I had promised myself I would. I did not follow Peter into Oscorp. I did not hover outside his classroom window. I did not act like a guard dog. I just made sure I was around enough that if something went wrong in a normal way, I could step in without making it a big thing. The first sign was small. I saw Peter outside the school entrance, half turned toward a vending machine that had eaten someone's dollar. He looked tired and annoyed, and he was talking to himself under his breath while he pressed buttons harder than he needed to. When the machine refused to cooperate, he huffed and gave it a quick shove. The machine rocked. Too far. It did not fall, but it shifted more than it should have. Peter froze with both hands still on the metal frame. His eyes widened for a second, and I saw his breathing change. He pulled his hands back like the machine had shocked him. He looked down at his palms, then glanced around quickly to see if anyone noticed. A couple kids were laughing nearby, not paying attention. A teacher was walking past with a clipboard, eyes forward. Nobody cared. Peter swallowed and picked up his backpack strap, pulling it higher on his shoulder with an awkward jerk. He walked away fast, head down. I stayed across the street near a bus stop, my posture loose, my face neutral. Inside, I felt a quick spark of recognition and a quiet satisfaction that I kept out of my expression. Okay, I said under my breath, calm. It started. I did not approach him that day. He needed room to notice what his body was doing without someone planting ideas in his head. Peter Parker did not need a mentor right now. He needed time to realize he was not sick, not losing his mind, and not alone in the city. I saw him again 2 days later at the library. He had a stack of books that looked heavier than he was comfortable carrying. He set them down at a table, then shifted one book to the side as if he meant to open it. He stopped. His fingers stayed on the cover. His eyes narrowed. He slowly lifted the book with 2 fingers, testing the weight. He lifted it too easily. Not a dramatic lift. Not a superhero move. Just a small, quiet correction in effort that did not match what the book weighed. He set it down again carefully, like he did not trust his hands. His mouth tightened. He leaned forward and whispered something to himself, annoyed and confused. Then he pulled a notebook out and started writing fast, like he could take control if he just turned it into information. I watched from a different aisle, pretending to browse. I kept my ring hand in my pocket. Peter looked up once, scanning the room. His eyes passed over me without stopping. I kept my face relaxed, my posture casual. He went back to writing. I waited until he packed up and left before I moved. I did not follow him all the way home. I walked my own route, staying out of his direct line, satisfied with what I had seen. That night, on a rooftop in Queens, I sat on a low ledge and let my legs hang over the side. The wind was light. The city noise was steady. I turned my green ring slightly, watching the way its surface caught the street light. Peter's powers were waking up. He was going to test them. He was going to make mistakes. He was going to get scared at least once and pretend he wasn't. I smiled faintly, then let it fade back to neutral. "All right," I said quietly. "That's tracked." I stood up, brushed my hands together once, and made the next decision. Stephen Strange. Not yet broken. Not yet humbled. Not yet anyone's idea of a mystical anything. At this point, he was just a surgeon with a reputation and a mouth that ran ahead of his patients. I left Queens before dawn. I kept my movements normal. Bus, train, walking. No green streaks across the sky. I could do that. I just did not need to. By late morning, I was outside a large hospital complex in Manhattan. I did not stand directly in front of the doors like I was there for a tour. I lingered near the edge of the foot traffic, watching the flow of staff and patients. I kept my shoulders loose and my expression easy. Doctors moved like they owned time. Nurses moved like they carried it. Administrators moved like they were late for something they were not going to fix. I waited. When Stephen Strange finally appeared, he did it like he expected the world to adjust around him. He walked out through the main entrance in a crisp suit with a long coat, hair neatly set, posture straight. He had a phone at his ear, speaking quickly with the tone of someone who did not like being interrupted. "No, I'm not taking it," he said, irritated. "He's got tremors. It's a non-starter. Send it to someone who likes gambling with their license." He paused, listening, then sighed sharply. "I don't care what his family wants," he said. "I care what his body can handle. That's the job." He ended the call without a goodbye and slipped the phone into his pocket. His face settled into a controlled, annoyed look, like irritation was a default setting. He walked toward a parked car. Not cheap. Clean. The kind of car that made it clear he did well. I stayed where I was, hands in my pockets. I did not stare like a fan. I watched him the way I watched everyone important. Calm. Specific. No emotion on my face that would invite questions. He opened the car door and paused when another doctor called his name from behind. "Stephen," a male voice said. "You have a minute." Strange did not turn immediately. He closed his eyes briefly, then turned with a polite expression that was slightly forced. "What is it?" he asked. The other doctor stepped closer, holding a folder. "The consult on the pediatric case. The one you told them you'd review." Strange looked at the folder like it was an inconvenience, then took it anyway. He flipped it open, scanned a page, and his eyes narrowed in focus. For a few seconds, his annoyance fell away and he looked like what he was, extremely skilled, extremely sharp, and used to being right. "That's not the plan I recommended," he said, flat. "They want." "I don't care what they want," Strange said, cutting him off, but not raising his voice. His tone stayed controlled. "If they follow that route, the kid's going to crash on the table. Tell them I'll review it again, but they're not doing that." The other doctor hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Strange handed the folder back like he was done with it and turned toward his car again. I felt a small shift in my expression, something close to amusement that I kept subtle. Strange was exactly as advertised. Good at his job. Bad at being easy. He got into his car, shut the door, and drove away. I did not follow him. I did not need his address. Not today. I just needed to verify where he was in his life and how he moved through the world. I needed to keep him in the correct mental box in my head, important later, not ready now. I walked away from the hospital, blending back into the crowd, already reorganizing my next step. Tony Stark. The file in my mind on Tony was thick. I knew the cave. I knew the suit. I knew the press conference. I knew the arc reactor. I knew exactly how many people would die in the chain of events around him if nothing changed. I also knew Tony did not respond well to strangers who demanded trust. So I was not going to demand anything. I picked a day when I knew he would be at his Malibu property. Before the public reveal had fully settled into the world's routine, while he was still operating with that mix of arrogance and exhaustion, before he had the habit of carrying responsibility like it was welded to his spine. I traveled cleanly. No spectacle. I arrived at the edge of the property line and waited until I could approach without walking past security like an idiot. The ring made it simple. Not a hack. Not a wipe. Just a quiet nudge of perception so cameras registered me as unimportant background. Enough to get through without alarms and without tripping anything violent. I walked up the driveway like I belonged there. Inside the main building, the air smelled like polished surfaces and ocean. The place was bright, open, expensive. The kind of space that looked like it was designed to be photographed. I heard Tony before I saw him. He was arguing with someone, voice sharp, words spilling quickly. I don't care if it's not standard, Tony said, irritated. Standard is why everything sucks. So we're not doing standard. A calmer voice replied, metallic and even. Your current design risks overheating at sustained output. Yeah, and your current personality risks boring me to death, Tony shot back. I walked into the workshop area without rushing. It was wide, full of tools and half-finished projects. Screens. Mechanical arms. The sound of power cycling. Tony Stark stood near a workbench in a black shirt, sleeves pushed up, hair slightly messy. He looked tired in the way people look tired when they refused to stop moving. There was grease on one hand. His posture was restless. Jarvis was speaking from overhead. Sir, you have an unauthorized visitor. Tony turned his head sharply. His eyes locked on me immediately. His face shifted into alert skepticism, then annoyance, then curiosity, all in one controlled motion. How did you get in here? He asked. I raised both hands slightly, palms open, friendly. Walking, I said cheerfully. It's a lost art. Tony stared for a beat. Okay. Cute. Now answer the question. I didn't break anything, I said lightly. No alarms. No smashed windows. I just came in. That is the problem, Tony replied, flat. His eyes flicked to my hands, then to my face, then to my posture. He was reading me quickly. Who are you? I smiled a little, keeping it relaxed. I'm Alex. Tony's expression did not soften. That's not helpful. It's accurate, I said. He took a step closer, tone cautious but still sharp. Are you here to sell me something, blackmail me, or kill me? None of those, I said. Tony's eyes narrowed. That's a short list. I like efficiency, I replied. He exhaled through his nose, irritated. Fine. What is it? I slid my right hand out of my pocket and held it up at chest level so he could see the ring clearly. The green metal looked plain if you didn't know what it was. The faint glow gave it away. Tony's eyes locked on it immediately. What is that? He asked, tone shifting into technical interest even as suspicion stayed on his face. I'm the leader of the Latern Corps, I said simply. Tony blinked once. His mouth twitched like he almost smiled, but he didn't commit to it. Okay. That sounds like a comic book thing. It is, I replied casually. Just not in the way you mean. Tony's gaze stayed on the ring. Latern Corps. Like, camping? Like a club? No, I said, still calm. Like a power organization. He looked up at me, eyes sharp again. You're telling me you walked into my house wearing a glowing ring and you're the leader of something called the Latern Corps? Yeah, I said. That's the summary. Tony leaned back slightly, glancing around as if expecting cameras to pop out. Is this a prank? Because I don't do pranks. I do pay back. I kept my tone friendly. Not a prank. I lifted my hand and formed a simple green construct in the air between us. A clean geometric shape, like a floating polyhedron. It hovered, perfectly still. I rotated it slowly with a small motion of my fingers. Tony's eyes widened slightly despite himself. He stepped closer, staring at it with focused attention. Okay, he said quietly. That's not a projector. Nope, I replied. He circled half a step, studying it from another angle. Energy construct. Hard light. Functionally, I said. Tony looked back at me. How? Ring, I said, keeping it simple. Powered by what? He pressed. Will, I said. His face shifted into a look that said he didn't like that answer. That's not a power source. It works anyway, I replied. Tony's jaw tightened. He pointed slightly at the construct without touching it. Can I scan it? You can try, I said pleasantly. It won't hurt my feelings. J.A.R.V.I.S, run a scan, Tony said quickly. Scanning, JARVIS replied. Tony watched his screens as data rolled. His eyes moved fast, tracking patterns. After a moment, JARVIS spoke again. Sir, I am reading an energy signature of unknown classification. It does not match any known spectrum in our database. Tony frowned, then looked at me again. Unknown classification. That's fun. I let the construct dissolve and kept my hand raised. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here because you matter. Tony's eyes narrowed. To who? To the planet, I said evenly, still not dramatic. Tony scoffed softly, but his attention stayed. That's a big statement from a guy who just walked into my living room. I'm offering you a place, I said. Join the Latern Corps. Tony stared, then barked a quick laugh that sounded surprised. You are recruiting me? Yes, I said, still cheerful. He ran a hand through his hair and paced 2 steps, thinking. His posture was restless, but his voice stayed controlled. Why me? You build things that work under pressure, I said. You don't freeze when it matters. Tony stopped and looked at me sharply. You don't know me. I know enough, I replied. He held my gaze, then glanced at my hand again. So, what? I put on a ring and I'm in. Not exactly, I said. But I can offer you something first. I opened my palm and let the ring project a small green containment field. Inside it, I formed a replica of a Latern power stone in miniature scale, glowing green, stable. Not the full stone from the room earlier, but a shard-sized piece of the same energy, compressed and controlled. Tony leaned in immediately, interest obvious. What is that? He asked, voice quieter. A stone, I said. Power source. You can integrate it into your suit. Or you can build a ring interface for it. Your call. Tony's eyes flicked between the stone and my face. He looked tempted. I saw it in the way his jaw loosened slightly, in the way his attention locked onto the technical possibilities. Then he stepped back and exhaled. "No," he said, firm. I blinked once, then smiled lightly. "No." Tony folded his arms. "No thanks. I don't take mystery batteries from strangers who break into my house and tell me I matter to the planet." "That's fair," I said easily. He watched me closely, expecting pushback. When I didn't give it, his expression shifted into mild confusion. "You're not going to argue?" he asked. "No," I replied. "You're Tony Stark. If you don't want it, you don't want it." Tony's eyes narrowed again. "That's a weird amount of acceptance." "I'm not here to win a negotiation," I said calmly. "I'm here to offer." He stared for another moment, then gestured vaguely. "All right. Offer made." I closed my hand, and the small stone construct dissolved. "No worries." Tony's posture stayed guarded. "So what now? You just leave?" "Yeah," I said. "I've got other stuff to do." Tony looked like he wanted to ask more, but he didn't. He nodded once, short and controlled. J.A.R.V.I.S, track him. "I'm already doing so, sir," Jarvis replied. I gave Tony a small, casual wave. "Try not to get yourself killed," I said lightly. Tony's mouth twitched. "Yeah, thanks. Same to you, Lantern guy." I turned and walked out the way I came in, calm, unhurried. The moment I cleared the property, I let the ring's subtle perception nudge drop. If Tony wanted to track me, he could try. He would get data. He wouldn't get control. As I walked along the cliffside road, the ocean air hit my face and cooled the skin around my eyes. My expression stayed relaxed, but my focus tightened again. Next, Steve Rogers. Captain America was still in the ice. Taking him out earlier was risky in a practical sense. There were agencies. There were politics. There were men in suits who would treat him like an object. I already knew the shape of that problem. But Steve alive earlier meant more time for him to adapt before bigger disasters stacked up. I did not treat it like a rescue mission with dramatic speeches. It was a location problem and a logistics problem. I traveled north. I avoided public notice where it mattered and stayed boring where it didn't. Planes. Connections. Cold air. The ring kept my body comfortable without changing how I looked. When I reached the region where the crash site was supposed to be, I slowed down. The landscape was white and flat, broken by ridges and ice fields. The sky was pale. Wind moved in steady pushes. The cold tried to bite through my clothes, but the ring held a stable temperature against my skin. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes track the horizon. "All right," I said quietly. "Let's find you." I raised my hand and projected a wide green scan pattern outward. Not a beam that lit up the sky. A controlled field that moved through ice and water in a broad sweep, reading density changes and abnormal metal concentrations. I kept it careful. No massive drilling. No explosions. No attention-grabbing energy spikes. The ring fed information back in clean lines. Metal fragments. Old debris. Sunken wreckage. Natural formations. I walked forward slowly, boots crunching in snow. I adjusted my gloves, flexing my fingers once. Minutes passed. Then the scan returned something that made me stop. A shape beneath the ice, deeper than the surface. A dense cluster. Aircraft remnants. A shield signature that registered distinct even through the ring's limited knowledge of this universe's materials. My mouth opened slightly, then I closed it again. A small rush of relief hit my chest, quick and controlled. "Found you," I said softly. I moved closer to the coordinates, each step measured. I kept scanning, narrowing the field. The ice above the site was thick. The water below was still. This was going to take time if I wanted to do it quietly and safely. I crouched and placed my gloved hand against the ice. The surface was rough, cold. I let the ring's energy flow into a tight circular area, warming and loosening the structure without cracking it violently. I began to carve. Not with a giant glowing drill. With controlled heat and shaping, the way you would cut through something carefully when you did not want the entire structure collapsing. The ring made it easier, but I still had to choose every movement. A circular section of ice softened and lifted as a single piece. I moved it aside and exposed darker ice below. I continued, layer by layer, patient. My face stayed calm, but my breathing changed slightly with focus. My shoulders tightened and loosened as I adjusted angles and pressure. After a while, I saw metal. A dull, corroded curve of aircraft frame. I widened the opening, careful not to send shock through the structure. I built a simple green brace around the edges of the cut to keep the ice stable. The brace held like a firm scaffold. I leaned over and scanned again. There. The unmistakable round of a shield, embedded near the cockpit area. And beneath it, frozen in place, Steve Rogers. Even through layers of ice, the shape of him was clear. The uniform. The body posture locked in stillness. The face partially obscured by frost. I let out a slow breath. My expression softened for a fraction of a second before returning to controlled focus. "Okay," I said quietly. "Now the hard part is doing this without turning it into a circus." I adjusted my stance and extended my hand again, building a larger construct frame around the Rex section, stabilizing it, preparing to lift without tearing it apart. The wind pushed across the open cut, cold air rushing downward. I tightened the brace, keeping the opening secure. I leaned in closer, eyes fixed on Steve's position, calculating the safest extraction angle, keeping my movements steady and careful. Chapter 4, Ice, Breath, and Rules. The ice gave way the way I wanted it to, slow and controlled. I kept one hand braced on the edge of the opening while the other guided the ring's energy into a tight, even cut. The green brace I had built around the hole held firm, keeping the surrounding sheet from cracking outward. Wind pushed down into the opening in steady bursts. Cold air hit my face and dried my lips. I blinked a few times and kept working. More metal came into view as I widened the cut. The wreck was older than it looked in photos, not because time had changed it much, but because the damage was clear up close. Bent frame. Torn plating. Jagged sections that had snapped instead of crumpled. A lot of it had been pressed into place by ice and pressure. The shield was still there. Even under frost and dull grime, it stood out. The shape and balance were familiar enough that my eyes went straight to it every time I checked my scan. And Steve Rogers was there, too, frozen into a pocket of ice that had formed around the cockpit like a mold. I took a slow breath and steadied myself. My face stayed calm, but I felt a small flicker in my chest that I did not bother to hide from myself. Relief. Focus. A little excitement that I kept under control. "Okay," I said quietly. "We do this clean." I extended my hand and built another construct, a rigid frame that slid down along the wreck's edges. It wasn't flashy. Just a support cradle that distributed pressure across multiple points, so lifting one section wouldn't twist another. I anchored it to the existing green brace at the opening, then pushed energy deeper, shaping supports around the cockpit area. The ring responded instantly, as smooth as breathing. I tested the frame with a gentle upward pull. The wreck shifted a few inches, slow and reluctant, and I stopped immediately. I adjusted the supports, changed angles, and tried again. This time, the movement was steadier. I nodded once and kept going. As the cockpit area rose, ice sheared off in thick plates and fell back into the water below. The sound was heavy and flat. I tightened the brace each time the structure shifted, keeping the opening stable. I did not want a loud crack carrying across the ice field. I did not want anyone showing up because the ground made noise. The cockpit section finally cleared enough that I could see Steve's full shape through the ice around him. He looked exactly like he should. Face still, eyes closed, body held in a rigid sleep. The uniform was visible under frost. The skin tone looked wrong because of the cold, but the form was intact. I exhaled and adjusted my stance. "All right, Captain," I said softly. "Let's get you out." I shaped a flat construct platform beneath the cockpit section, sliding it under like a pallet. Then I guided the whole structure upward and out of the hole in one slow, steady lift. Once it was on the surface, I lowered it carefully onto the snow a few feet away from the opening. The platform absorbed the weight and spread it out so it didn't sink. I stepped back, flexed my fingers once inside my gloves, and looked around. Empty horizon. White distance. No lights. No vehicles. Nothing but wind and ice and the sound of my own breathing. Good. Next problem was heat. Thawing him out here would be stupid. Exposure would kill him before the ice did. I needed a controlled environment. A stable temperature. A clean place to work. And I needed to do it without dragging him through public systems. I crouched beside the cockpit section and pressed my hand against the ice around Steve's shoulder. The ring gave me a stream of readings immediately. Temperature gradients, density, fractures. I adjusted the flow, warming only the outermost layer, softening it enough that it stopped biting into the uniform. I wasn't trying to melt him free yet. I was preparing him for transport. I built a larger construct around the cockpit section, a sealed shell with reinforced corners, like a container designed for safe handling. I made the interior stable, not warm, just stable, keeping the ice from shifting and cracking around him while I moved him. Then I shaped another construct under it, long and flat, like a sled with runners. I stood, rolled my shoulders once, and looked down at the sealed container holding Steve Rogers. "Okay," I said. "You're going to hate this part." I gripped the edge of the sled and pulled. The construct glided over the ice smoothly. I kept my pace steady, not rushing. Every few minutes I glanced behind me, checking the horizon. Nothing moved. No distant lights. No sound of engines. I kept going until the crash site was far enough away that even if someone stumbled onto it later, the opening would be hard to find without already knowing where to look. Then I stopped and turned back. I raised my hand and sealed the original cut in the ice, returning it to a smooth, unbroken surface as best as I could. It wasn't perfect, but from above it looked like wind and snow had done what wind and snow always did. I lowered my hand and nodded once. "Good enough," I said. Now I needed a place to thaw him out. I had already planned that part. Not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because this was a predictable problem. I had arranged a quiet safe house earlier, long before I ever found the wreck. A remote cabin with power, medical supplies, and no need for names or paperwork. I had used normal channels where possible, and the ring where I needed to smooth over gaps. I dragged the sled to a point where I could lift it without strain. Then I built a larger construct around the whole thing, a compact transport shell that looked like a sealed cargo unit from a distance. I lifted it. The construct rose a few feet above the ice and hovered. I kept it low and controlled. No visible beam, no bright flare into the sky. I moved forward across the ice field, guiding it toward the nearest coastline access where I could blend into normal routes again. The wind pushed harder in places. I compensated without thinking, adjusting the shell's balance and drag. By the time I reached land, my shoulders had tightened from focus, and my jaw felt stiff from cold air. I stretched my neck slightly, then continued. Hours later, the cabin's front door swung open under my hand, and warm air rolled out over my face. I carried the transport shell inside and set it down in the middle of the main room. The cabin was small but clean. Wood floors. A simple couch. A table. A kitchen area. 2 rooms in back. A medical kit stacked on a shelf alongside blankets and bottled water. I shut the door and locked it. Then I stood still for a second and listened. Only the hum of the heater and the quiet of a place that hadn't been lived in recently. I nodded, then walked to the container and knelt beside it. "All right," I said quietly. "Let's wake you up." I removed the outer shell first, letting the cockpit section sit on the construct platform. Then I began the slow work of thawing. I didn't blast it with heat. I didn't shatter it. I fed warmth into the ice in thin layers, moving around his body evenly. The ring let me control the temperature precisely, but I still watched it like a hawk. If the ice melted too fast, water could pool where it didn't belong. If it melted unevenly, pressure could shift. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The cabin warmed fully. The ice began to sweat and soften. Thin streams ran down the sides of the cockpit section and dripped onto the wood floor. I shaped a shallow catch tray to keep it contained. As Steve's face became clearer, I felt my focus tighten. His skin tone improved slowly as the temperature rose. His lips went from pale to slightly more normal. The frost around his eyebrows and hairline melted away in tiny beads. When I reached the last layer around his mouth and nose, I slowed even more. Breathing came first. I eased the ice away from his face completely and hovered my hand near his throat, checking pulse manually even though the ring was already giving me readings. There. A pulse, faint but present. I exhaled once, relieved, and leaned back slightly. "Okay," I said. "We're on schedule." I thawed the rest in careful stages, freeing his arms and torso enough that he wasn't locked in place. I kept his core temperature rising slowly. I wrapped him in blankets as soon as his body was exposed, adding heat in controlled amounts. I did not pour hot water on him. I did not do anything stupid. Eventually, he was out. Steve Rogers lay on the construct platform, wrapped in blankets, water dripping from his uniform. I had cut away sections of the cockpit metal cleanly to avoid tearing fabric or skin. The shield lay beside him on the floor, still heavy and solid. I watched his chest. It rose. It fell. Then his eyelids fluttered. I straightened slightly and held still, hands open, posture non-threatening. Steve's eyes opened fully, unfocused at first. He blinked several times. His breathing sped up as he tried to understand where he was. His gaze moved fast, scanning the room, snapping from the ceiling to the walls to the door. Then his eyes locked onto me. He tensed immediately, trying to sit up in one quick motion. His body didn't cooperate. He was weak. The movement turned into a partial lift that ended with him bracing on one elbow, breathing harder. I lifted my hands a little higher. "Easy," I said cheerfully, "calm. You were frozen. You're going to feel like garbage for a minute." Steve's jaw tightened. His eyes were sharp even through confusion. He looked at my face like he was trying to place me in memory. "Where am I?" he asked, voice rough. "Cabin," I replied. "Private. Warm. Safe." He swallowed, then glanced to the side and saw his shield. His expression shifted slightly, attention locking onto it the way a soldier locked onto a weapon. He tried to reach for it. His hand trembled. I didn't stop him. I just stayed ready to move if he panicked. He managed to drag the shield closer by an inch, then gave up, breathing hard. He looked back at me. Who are you? I'm Alex, I said, still light. I pulled you out of the ice. Steve's eyes narrowed. Ice? Yeah, I said. You've been out for a while. His breathing changed again. He looked away, then back, like his mind was catching up in pieces. Bucky, he asked suddenly, voice tight. I kept my expression steady. I did not react in a way that would raise questions. I chose my words carefully. I don't have him here, I said calmly. I'm sorry. Steve's face hardened. The sadness didn't show as tears or weakness. It showed as controlled tension. He nodded once, slow, like he had just accepted something he already feared. He looked at the room again, more methodical now. This isn't a military facility, he said. No, I replied. He stared at me. Then why? I shrugged lightly. Because leaving you there didn't seem right. Steve's eyes stayed on me, suspicious and disciplined. Who sent you? Nobody, I said. He did not believe that. It showed in his face, in the way his eyes stayed sharp and his breathing stayed measured. He shifted his weight, testing his strength, and sat up a little more. His shoulders trembled with the effort, but he kept his posture straight anyway. Are you Hydra? He asked flatly. I let out a short laugh, surprised, and shook my head. No. That answer made him relax by a fraction, but only a fraction. Then why didn't you take me to the army? He asked. Because the army you remember isn't the one you'd find, I said simply. Steve frowned. What year is it? I hesitated for only a moment, then answered cleanly. 2008. Steve stared at me. His face didn't explode into panic. It tightened. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. He inhaled slowly through his nose and exhaled through his mouth, steadying himself the way someone did when they didn't have time to fall apart. 63 years, he said quietly. Yeah, I replied. He looked down at his hands, then at his chest, then at the wet fabric of his uniform. He flexed his fingers slowly, like he was checking that his body was still his. Then his eyes snapped back up to me, sharp again. How did you thaw me out? He asked. I held up my right hand. The green ring was visible in the cabin's warm light. It did not scream for attention, but it glowed faintly. Steve's gaze locked onto it immediately. What is that? He asked. I nodded toward the ring. This is how. He watched it, careful. You're not a doctor. No, I said. But this helps with a lot of things. Steve's posture shifted. He looked like he wanted to get to his feet. His muscles tried, and he forced himself upright, shaky but stubborn. He stood with knees slightly bent, balancing as if he expected the floor to move. I didn't move. I let him stand. He took one step toward his shield and picked it up with effort. His grip tightened around the strap. The motion steadied him more than the blankets had. He faced me again, shield held at his side, not raised, but ready. Explain, he said. I smiled slightly, friendly. Fair. I walked to the table and sat on the edge casually, giving him space. I kept my tone easy because Steve responded better to clear, calm information than to pressure. My name is Alex, I said. I'm the leader of something called the Latern Corps. Steve's eyes narrowed. That sounds like an organization. It is, I said. His gaze stayed fixed. Government? No. Private, he pressed. Not like a company, I said. It's a group with rules. Steve didn't like vague answers. His expression made that obvious. I nodded once and simplified. The ring is a power tool. It makes energy constructs. Shields, restraints, lifting platforms, stuff like that. It responds to willpower. Steve's eyes flicked to the ring again. Willpower. Yeah, I said, still calm. Not magic tricks. It's controlled. It has limits. It needs focus. Steve didn't relax, but he listened. That was his personality. Even when suspicious, he listened. Why me? He asked. Because you're important, I replied. He frowned. Important to who? I leaned forward slightly, hands resting on my knees, voice still friendly. To this world. To people. And I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm saying it because I know what kind of choices you make. Steve stared at me like he was measuring whether that was manipulation. I kept going, practical. You were frozen in a place where someone would eventually find you. I found you earlier. You're awake now, in a cabin, with your shield. You're not restrained. You're not being threatened. That's all true. Steve's jaw tightened. You still haven't told me what you want. I smiled, because that was fair. I want you to join the Latern Corps. He blinked once, surprised. You want me to join your organization, he repeated. Yes, I said. He looked down at his shield, then back at me. Why would I do that? Because you like helping people, I said simply. Steve's eyes narrowed again, but his face softened slightly at the edges, like that hit something real. I don't need a ring to do that, he said. I know, I replied, still cheerful. You've proven that already. He watched me closely. If I say no, then you say no, I replied. I'm not going to force you. Steve didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath, then stepped closer, cautious. What's the catch? He asked. No catch, I said. There are rules. You don't use it to hurt innocent people. You don't use it to get rich. You don't use it to control governments. You don't go around showing off. And you don't hand it to someone else. Steve's face stayed serious. That sounds like common sense. Yeah, I said with a small grin. It is. He studied me. How many people are in this corps? At the moment, I said honestly, it's just me. Steve's eyebrows lifted slightly. That surprised him more than anything else so far. So you're calling yourself the leader of a group of one, he said, skeptical. I shrugged lightly. I'm starting it. Steve looked like he wanted to argue, then stopped. He was quiet for a beat. Then he asked, why now? I kept my tone steady and practical. Because there are things in this world that are going to get dangerous. Not tomorrow morning, but soon. And having capable people with tools helps. Steve's eyes sharpened. You're talking like you have intel. I smiled faintly. I have enough. He did not like that answer. It showed. But he didn't push it yet. He was still physically weak, still adjusting, and he was choosing his battles. He shifted his grip on the shield and asked, if I accept, what happens? I nodded, glad he asked it that way. You get a ring. You learn how to use it. You keep your moral compass. You keep your discipline. And you don't let the ring make you reckless. Steve looked down at his hands again, then back at me. You can just give me a ring. Yes, I said. I lifted my hand and let the ring project a small green glow above my palm. The glow condensed into a simple band shape, then hardened into a second ring. It looked similar to mine, but it was new, clean, and unclaimed. Steve's eyes tracked the process carefully. He didn't flinch, but his shoulders tensed slightly. I held the ring out toward him, keeping my arm extended and still. "You don't have to put it on right now," I said. "You can hold it first. See how it feels." Steve hesitated, then stepped forward and reached out. His hand was steady despite the weakness. He took the ring between his thumb and forefinger, holding it like it could be dangerous, but not like he was afraid. He turned it over, inspecting the surface. "It's warm," he said quietly, surprised. I nodded. "It responds to you." Steve looked up at me. "It responds to willpower." "Yeah," I said. He glanced down again, then took a slow breath. His face tightened with the weight of the decision. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical and heavy, the way it always was with him. "You're asking me to join something I don't understand," he said. "I am," I replied. "And I'm offering to explain as much as you want before you commit." Steve looked away for a second, eyes moving to the cabin door, then the window, then back to his shield. He was thinking about the time gap. About being alone. About waking up in a world that had moved on without him. Then he looked at me again, serious. "If I join," he said, "I'm not working for you." I smiled, friendly and accepting. "Good. I don't want soldiers who obey without thinking." Steve's mouth tightened, almost a hint of approval that he didn't let become a smile. He lowered his gaze to the ring in his hand again. "I'll do it," he said. My expression brightened slightly. "All right." He held the ring up. "What do I do?" "Put it on," I said simply. "Any finger. Whichever feels right." Steve nodded once. He slid it onto his right hand, ring finger, slow and careful. The green light flared gently, not exploding, not blasting the room, just a clean pulse that washed over his hand and then settled. Steve's eyes widened a little. He flexed his fingers, watching the light respond faintly. He looked up at me. "Now what?" "Now you learn," I said cheerfully. "First lesson is simple. Don't try to make anything complicated while you're still half-thawed. Start with small things." Steve nodded, taking it seriously. I lifted my hand. "Make a shape. Something simple. A square." Steve stared at his ring, jaw tight with focus. He lifted his hand slowly. A faint green glow formed above his palm. It flickered once, unstable, then steadied as he narrowed his eyes and breathed out. A small square appeared. Not perfect, but clear enough. It hovered for a second, then wobbled and dissolved. Steve frowned, annoyed at himself. "That's normal," I said quickly, still relaxed. "You just woke up in a new century and you're running on low calories. You did fine." He looked at me, then nodded once, accepting the practical explanation. "Okay," he said. "What else do I need to know?" I leaned forward slightly, tone still easy but more serious because this mattered. "The ring is strong. It can save lives fast. It can also make you overconfident. You're not going to do that, but I'm saying it anyway." Steve's expression stayed firm. "Understood. And you don't tell people where it came from," I added. "If someone asks, you keep it simple. You don't hand them a full explanation." Steve's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because people will try to take it," I said evenly. "Governments, criminals, anybody who thinks it's a weapon they can own." Steve's jaw tightened. "They can try." I smiled slightly. "That's the spirit." He looked down at his hand again, then back up. "What about you?" "What about me?" I asked. "Why do you have this?" he said, "and why are you doing this alone?" I shrugged lightly, keeping it grounded. "Because I can. Because it's useful. Because I'm not waiting for permission." Steve studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly, like he didn't fully trust it but accepted the results in front of him. "All right," he said. I stood up from the table and walked to the kitchen area. I grabbed a bottle of water and a packaged protein bar from the shelf and tossed them gently toward him. Steve caught them automatically, reflexes still sharp. "Eat," I said. "You're going to feel better fast, but not if you try to tough it out." Steve looked at the bar, then at me. "You're giving orders." I smiled. "I'm giving advice that sounds like an order." He huffed quietly, then unwrapped the bar and took a bite. His expression didn't change much, but his shoulders eased slightly as he chewed. He drank water next, slow and controlled. I watched him for a moment, satisfied. He was grounded. Not panicking. Not spiraling. That was Steve. After he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at me again, more present now. "So," he said, "Latern Corp. What's the mission?" I nodded once, tone calm. "Protect people when the usual systems fail. Handle problems that move faster than paperwork. Keep your head. Stay disciplined." Steve's eyes stayed steady. "That's a job." "Yeah," I said. "It is." He glanced down at the ring again. "And you're sure this doesn't control me?" "It doesn't," I said. "It responds. It doesn't steer." Steve nodded slowly. "Then we start training," he said, direct. I smiled wider, pleased. "We do." I walked to the back room and pulled out a folded duffel I had prepared earlier. Inside were clean clothes, simple shoes, and a jacket that would fit him. Nothing fancy. Just practical. I handed it over. "Change out of the wet uniform. We can store it." Steve took the bag. "Thank you," he said, sincere. I nodded. "You're welcome." He paused, then looked at me with a serious expression. "I want to find out what happened. What I missed." "I know," I said. Steve's eyes stayed fixed. "And if there's a war now?" "There's always something," I replied, still calm. "We'll move carefully." Steve nodded once, accepting that. He turned toward the back room to change, moving slower than before but steadier, shield in one hand like he didn't want it out of reach. I stayed in the main room, listening to the heater hum, watching the faint glow on my ring and his when he re-entered a few minutes later dressed in clean clothes. He looked more like himself. Still tired. Still adjusting. But upright. Present. He stood near the center of the room and looked at his ring again, then at me. "All right," he said. "Teach me." Chapter 5, Repetition and Control. Steve woke up early. I didn't need a clock to know it. The cabin was quiet in the way it got quiet when someone was already moving carefully, trying not to make noise out of habit. Floorboards creaked once, soft and controlled, then again, spaced out. A drawer opened slowly. Something metal tapped wood, then went still. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling for a second, letting my brain come online without rushing. My ring was still on my finger. The faint glow was steady, like it had been all night. I sat up, stretched my arms once, and walked out into the main room. Steve was standing near the table, already dressed, hair still damp from a quick wash. The duffel sat on a chair. His shield leaned against the wall within arm's reach. His posture was straight, but his shoulders were looser than last night. He looked better. Not fully recovered, but stable. He turned when he heard me. "Morning," I said cheerfully. Morning, he replied, serious but not unfriendly. I walked toward the kitchen area and started pulling out supplies. You sleep? A little, Steve said. He glanced at the window, then back at me. I kept waking up. Yeah, I said easily. That's normal. He nodded once, accepting it. I set a kettle on the small stove and turned it on. Then I placed 2 mugs on the table and pulled out simple food. Protein bars again, a loaf of bread, peanut butter, some fruit, and a small packet of instant oatmeal. Steve watched quietly. He didn't talk just to talk. He waited. I glanced at him and smiled faintly. You're a get-to-work guy. I don't like wasting time, he replied. Same, I said, still light. I just like being less miserable while I do it. His mouth tightened slightly, like he almost smiled, but didn't let it go far. We ate at the table. I kept it simple. No speeches. No history lessons. Just food, water, and the basic reality that his body needed fuel. Steve ate steadily, not fast. He moved with discipline even when he was alone. He kept checking his hand, rotating the ring slightly like he was trying to understand how something so small could do what he'd seen. When the kettle whistled, I poured hot water into the mugs and handed him one. He took it and nodded. Thanks. All right, I said, finishing my food. Training. Steve set his mug down carefully. Now. Now, I replied. He stood immediately, like he'd been waiting for permission. I pushed my chair back and stood too, then walked to the center of the main room where there was the most open space. The cabin wasn't big, but it was enough for basics. I held up my ring hand. Rule 1. You don't practice with the shield in your other hand. Steve glanced at it, then looked at me. Why? Because you'll default to old habits, I said simply. And you'll use the ring like a backup instead of a tool you actually control. Put it down. It'll still be there. Steve hesitated for a second, then set the shield against the wall, still within reach. He didn't like leaving it, but he did it. I nodded once. Good. Steve stepped back into the open space and looked at me. What's first? Breathing, I said. He blinked. Breathing. Yeah, I replied. The ring responds to your focus. If your breathing is messy, your output is messy. You're already good at controlling stress. This just makes it visible. Steve's expression tightened a little, like he didn't love that phrasing, but he didn't argue. I demonstrated. I inhaled slowly, exhaled slowly, then lifted my hand. A simple green sphere formed above my palm, steady and perfectly smooth. I held it there without wobble for a few seconds, then let it dissolve. Your turn, I said. Steve lifted his hand. His gaze narrowed. He inhaled. Exhaled. The glow formed, brighter than before, but the shape flickered, flattening into something uneven. It looked like it wanted to be a sphere and then gave up halfway. Steve's jaw tightened. He tried to force it. I shook my head. Less forcing. Steve glanced at me, annoyed. I'm not forcing. Yes, you are, I said, still cheerful. You're trying to muscle it. Don't. He took a slower breath and tried again. This time the sphere formed cleaner, but it still pulsed faintly at the edges. It held for 2 seconds, then dissolved. Steve exhaled and looked at his ring like he was irritated with it. That was better, I said. Again. He did it again. Then again. After 10 minutes, his sphere held steady for a full 5 seconds without flicker. Sweat had formed lightly at his hairline from focus and effort, not from heat. His shoulders rose and fell more evenly now. He lowered his hand. Okay. Good, I said. Rule 2. Start small and stay boring. Steve looked at me. Boring. Boring, I repeated, smiling. No giant weapons. No big shields. No planes. Not today. Steve's face stayed serious. I wasn't going to. Good, I said. Because you'd fail and get mad. He didn't deny it. He just stared. I pointed at the floor. Make a straight line. 6 inches. Steve did it. The line appeared clean, like a glowing green chalk mark hovering an inch above the floor. It trembled slightly. Hold it, I said. He held it for 3 seconds. It trembled less. Again, I said. He did it again. We worked through shapes that did not feel heroic. Lines. Squares. Rectangles. A simple cube. A simple flat disc. Nothing flashy. Steve didn't complain, but I could see the impatience in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes kept drifting to his shield and back. After another stretch of repetition, I raised a hand. Stop. Steve lowered his hand immediately. Rule 3, I said. The ring can do more than one thing, but it doesn't replace your brain. You're not going to solve every problem by making a bigger object. Steve's eyes stayed steady. Understood. I nodded. Good. Now we introduce function. He waited. I picked up an empty glass bottle from the counter and set it on the table. Then I walked 6 feet away and faced it. I want you to lift that bottle, I said. Not fast. Not with a giant hand. No squeezing. Just lift it 3 inches and hold it there. Steve frowned slightly. Why not a hand? Because a hand is harder, I said. You'll get the finger positions wrong and overcomplicate it. Make a cradle. Like a small platform with sides. Steve stared at the bottle. He lifted his hand and focused. A platform formed under the bottle, but it appeared a fraction too high and nudged the bottle sideways. It tipped, wobbled, and would have fallen if I hadn't flicked my own ring and stabilized it with a quick green brace. Steve's face tightened. Sorry. Don't apologize, I said lightly. Fix it. He tried again. Slower. This time he formed the platform under it without touching it, then lifted gently. The bottle rose 3 inches and hovered, swaying a little. Steve's eyes narrowed. His breathing steadied. The platform stabilized. He held it. I watched closely, then nodded. Good. Hold it for 10 seconds. He did. Set it down, I said. He lowered it slowly. The bottle touched the table without clink or bounce. The construct dissolved. Steve's shoulders eased slightly. A small look of satisfaction crossed his face before he smoothed it away. Again, I said. We repeated that exercise until he could lift, hold, and set down without any sway. After that, I introduced something else. Restraints, I said. Steve's eyes sharpened. You mean handcuffs? Something like that, I replied. But you don't clamp them on like you're angry. You form them with space, you control the pressure, and you keep the person breathing. Steve's jaw tightened. I'm not going to choke someone. I know, I said, calm. Still needs practice. Your ring doesn't know your intentions unless you control it properly. I stepped toward him. I'm going to simulate. You restrain me at the wrists. Loose enough that I'm not hurt. Tight enough that I can't pull out. Steve hesitated. You trust me? I'm standing here, I said cheerfully. So yes. He lifted his hand. Green bands formed around my wrists. They were too tight at first, squeezing. I felt the pressure and raised my eyebrows at him. Steve's eyes widened slightly. He relaxed the bands immediately. Sorry. I smiled. Better. He adjusted them again, then stepped closer as if he wanted to check physically. He stopped himself, staying disciplined and cautious. Try to get out, he said. I pulled. The bands held but didn't hurt. Good, I said. Now release. He released them instantly. Steve lowered his hand and watched his ring, expression thoughtful. It responds fast. Yeah, I said. That's why you train not to be sloppy. He nodded once. We broke for water. Steve drank more than he probably wanted to admit he needed. I let him. He didn't complain. He didn't make jokes. He just did what had to be done. I kept my tone light anyway. You're doing better than I expected, I said. Steve looked at me. You expected me to do worse. I expected you to be more stubborn, I replied with a grin. His mouth tightened slightly. I am stubborn. Yeah, I said. You just have good aim with it. He stared at me for a second longer, then looked away, but his expression was less tense than before. By the afternoon, we moved outside. The air was cold and clean. Snow covered the ground in uneven patches around the cabin. Trees stood dense and still. The sky was pale. I walked into the clearing behind the cabin and turned to face him. Outdoor practice is different, I said. More space. More distraction. Steve nodded, eyes scanning the area like he was mapping exits and threats out of habit. I pointed at a fallen log. Lift it. Same as the bottle. Slow. Steve lifted his hand. A wide platform formed under the log. It rose steadily, a foot off the ground, and hovered. The edges of the construct shimmered slightly from the strain. Steve's jaw tightened. He held it, breathing controlled. Set it down, I said. He lowered it carefully. I nodded. Good. We moved to motion. Make a ramp, I said. A simple incline. Nothing fancy. Steve formed it. The ramp appeared solid and clean. Now walk up it, I said. Steve stepped forward, tested it with his boot, then walked up. It held. He walked down. Again, I said. We repeated until it didn't flicker under him. Then I introduced the first thing that looked like defense. A shield, Steve said, looking at me like it was obvious. I shook my head. Not your shield. He frowned. Why? Because you'll shape it like yours, I said. And you'll get attached to the idea it has to be that. Make a plain barrier. Flat rectangle. Wide enough to cover your torso. Steve stared at the space in front of him, then lifted his hand. A barrier formed, solid and clear. I walked 10 feet away and made a small green projectile, like a blunt ball, then flicked it toward him with controlled speed. It hit the barrier and bounced off. Steve barely flinched, but the barrier wobbled slightly. Hold, I said. He held it steady. I sent another, slightly faster. It hit. The barrier flickered at the edges. Steve's eyes narrowed. His breathing slowed. The barrier steadied again. I nodded. Good. Again. We continued until he could take repeated impacts without visible flicker. Then I stopped. Steve lowered his hand and exhaled slowly. He looked at me, face serious. What happens if I run out? He asked. Good question, I said. I walked closer and held up my own ring. The ring has a charge. It can be replenished. The way we do that right now is limited, but it's not impossible. For you, the bigger issue is mental fatigue first. You'll lose control before you run out of power if you're tired or emotional. Steve's eyes stayed sharp. So I need rest. Yeah, I said. Rest and discipline. Which you already have. Steve glanced down at his hand, then up at me. This ring could stop a lot of things. It could, I replied. He held my gaze. Why give it to me? I kept my tone grounded. Because I want someone I can trust to use it carefully. And because you're going to put people first even when it's inconvenient. Steve's jaw tightened slightly, like he didn't like praise. I don't want special treatment, he said. I'm not giving you special treatment, I replied cheerfully. I'm giving you equipment and a training schedule. That got a small shift in his expression, like he approved of how plain that sounded. We went back inside as the light faded. Steve ate again without complaint. He asked practical questions while he ate, the way a soldier learned a new tool. How far can constructs reach? He asked. Depends on focus, I said. But we're not pushing range yet. How fast can it react? He asked. As fast as you can think and control, I said. What about interference? He asked. Certain energies can mess with it, I said. But you'll learn what to watch for as we see it. He accepted each answer, filing it away. Later, after he showered again and changed, he stood near the window and stared out into the dark trees for a few seconds. His shoulders were squared, but his posture had a quiet heaviness to it. Not dramatic. Just real. I stayed near the table, cleaning up. He turned slightly. Alex. Yeah, I said, looking over. Do people still need Captain America? He asked, voice calm but tight. I paused with a dish in my hand, then set it down gently. I didn't let my face get too serious, but my tone softened. People always need someone who does the right thing without making it complicated, I said. Steve's expression tightened, like he was holding on to something. He nodded once, slow. Okay, he said quietly. I smiled lightly. Also, you're not required to wear the old suit tomorrow. He blinked, surprised by the shift. I wasn't planning to, he said. Good, I replied. Because it's wet and it smells like ocean wreck. His mouth tightened again, and this time the almost smile came a little closer to real before he smoothed it away. He moved toward the small couch and sat down carefully, still getting used to a normal seat. He flexed his ring hand, staring at it. How long do you plan to keep me here? He asked. A few days, I said. Until you're steady on your feet and your constructs don't wobble every time you blink. Steve nodded. And then? Then we decide the next move, I said. But not tonight. Steve didn't argue. He looked tired now, the way exhaustion showed up when someone finally stopped pushing. All right, he said. I stood and walked past him toward my own room, then paused at the doorway and glanced back. Steve, I said. He looked up. You did good today, I said simply, still cheerful. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Thank you. I closed the door behind me and let the cabin settle into quiet again, with the heater humming and 2 green rings glowing faintly in the dark. Chapter 6, Calls, Conditions, and a New Ring. Steve was steady enough by the 3rd day that I stopped watching him like he might fall over if he turned too fast. He still moved like someone waking up from a long injury. Not weak, exactly, but careful. His steps were quiet. His balance was controlled. His ring constructs held shape without trembling every time the wind shifted outside. He could lift a log and set it down without overcorrecting. He could form a barrier and keep it solid through repeated impacts. He could restrain my wrists without squeezing. More important than any of that, he listened. He did not try to skip steps. He did not argue with the basics once he understood why they mattered. He asked short, direct questions, then used the answers. That was Steve. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't impatient in the reckless way. He was impatient in the work way. That morning, he finished his oatmeal and set the bowl in the sink. He rinsed it immediately like he didn't want to leave a mess in someone else's space. Then he turned to me, posture straight, expression serious. "You said we decide the next move," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." He glanced at the window, then back at me. "You're going to contact someone?" "Yep," I said cheerfully. Steve's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who?" "Nick Fury," I replied. He didn't react like a civilian hearing a strange name. He reacted like a soldier hearing a name he'd want to know more about. His jaw tightened, and his gaze sharpened. "Who is he?" Steve asked. "He runs S.H.I.E.L.D., I said simply. Steve frowned. "Strategic Homeland, something." "Security," I said. "They're a big intelligence group. Lots of reach." Steve stared for a beat. "And they'll want me." "Yeah," I replied, calm. "They'll want to control you, study you, use you, put you in a museum, or pretend they're doing one while doing another." Steve's expression hardened. "Then why call?" "Because if we don't, they'll find you eventually," I said. "And I'd rather set rules first instead of reacting later." Steve nodded once. He didn't like it, but he understood it. "Rules," he repeated. "Rules," I confirmed. I walked to the table and picked up a phone I'd bought for this purpose. Cheap. Prepaid. No personal name. I sat down and rested my elbow on the tabletop, keeping my posture relaxed. Steve stayed standing across from me, arms at his sides, shield leaning against the wall behind him, ring hand visible. "You want to be in the room?" I asked. "Yes," he replied immediately. "Good," I said. "Stay quiet unless I ask." Steve's eyes narrowed. "I'm not going to." "I know," I said, smiling. "That's why I'm saying it." His mouth tightened, then he nodded once. I punched in the number. It rang twice. A calm voice answered, low and controlled. "Yeah." I didn't bother with fake names. Fury wouldn't care. "Nick Fury," I said, casual. "I've got Captain America." Silence for half a second. Not shock, not disbelief. Just a small pause that meant he was taking it seriously. Then Fury spoke again, even. "Where are you?" "Not giving that over the phone," I said cheerfully. Another beat. "Prove it." I glanced at Steve. He was watching me like he was watching a negotiation happen across a table. I lifted my ring hand and formed a tiny green construct in the shape of a star inside a circle. Not an American flag, not a costume reference. Just clean geometry. I let it hover above the phone's microphone and crackle softly with controlled energy. "That's my proof," I said. Fury didn't ask what it was. He asked the right question. "How did you get him?" "I pulled him out of the ice," I replied. "Earlier than whoever was going to find him." "And he's alive?" Fury said, flat. "Yeah," I said. "He's alive. He's stable. He's not in a lab." Fury's voice stayed level. "You want something?" "Yeah," I said. "Ground rules." Fury did not laugh. He didn't sound offended. He sounded like someone who expected that. "Talk." I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping it light but firm. You don't put him in custody. You don't restrain him. You don't isolate him. You don't drag him through medical tests without consent. You don't treat him like a weapon. You treat him like a person who served his country and woke up in a new century. Steve's posture shifted subtly. I saw it in the way his shoulders squared a little more. Fury was quiet for a beat, then spoke. You're telling me how to run my agency? Yeah, I said, still calm. I am. Fury exhaled softly through his nose, like he wasn't annoyed but wasn't amused either. You're not in a position to demand. I am, I replied easily. Because right now, you don't have him. I do. And I'm calling you instead of disappearing. Another beat. Then Fury's tone shifted slightly. Less testing, more practical. Is he coherent? Yes, I said. Does he know who he is? Fury asked. Steve didn't react to that question outwardly, but I saw his jaw tighten. He knows exactly who he is, I said. And you're with him, Fury said. Yes, I replied. Fury's voice stayed steady. Bring him in. No, I said pleasantly. Silence again. Then Fury spoke, low. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm making it safer than you'd like, I corrected. Steve's eyes flicked to my face, then back to the phone. Fury paused, then said, what do you want? A meeting. Yeah, I said. Neutral location. Public enough you won't try anything dumb. Private enough we can talk without a crowd. Fury didn't hesitate long. Name it. I already had one in mind. A small diner off a highway route. Cameras, people, exits, and enough noise to discourage anyone from trying to pull something quietly. I gave him the location and the time. Fury listened, then said, I'll be there. You'll come alone, I added. Fury didn't promise that. He didn't lie either. I'll come with what I need. That's not the same thing, I said, still cheerful. It's the only thing you're getting, Fury replied. I accepted that. Fury was fury. Fine, I said. But you don't bring a capture team into the building. If you want backup, you keep it far enough away that Steve can leave without stepping into a trap. Fury's voice stayed calm. You're planning to walk him out? Yeah, I said. He's not cargo. Fury paused. You said you had proof. That ring. It's part of what I'm doing, I said. What are you doing? Fury asked. I kept it simple. Building a new organization. The Latern Corp. Fury didn't sound impressed. He sounded like he was filing it away. Bring your core to the diner. Just me, I said. Fury's voice dropped slightly. If this is a game. It's not, I said, more serious now. My tone stayed controlled, but the cheerfulness pulled back. And if you try to take him by force, you will fail. Fury didn't respond emotionally. We'll see. We will, I agreed. I ended the call. Steve had been still the entire time. Now he exhaled slowly. You threatened him, he said. I warned him, I replied, tone light again. Steve's eyes stayed sharp. He won't like that. I don't care, I said. He doesn't have to like it. He has to respect it. Steve nodded once. And if he doesn't? I smiled slightly. Then we leave. Steve's expression stayed serious. You're sure this won't make things worse? It might make things messy, I said honestly. But it reduces the chances of you getting treated like a frozen artifact. Steve looked away briefly, then back. All right. We left the cabin 2 hours later. Steve wore simple clothes. Dark jacket. Jeans. Practical boots. His shield was in a plain duffel bag. His ring stayed on his hand, visible but not glowing unless he used it. I drove. Steve sat in the passenger seat, posture straight, watching the road and the trees like he was still trying to absorb the fact that the world had highways like this now. His expression wasn't dramatic. It was focused, quiet, and tense in a controlled way. At the diner, I parked across the lot and watched for a minute before we got out. A black SUV pulled in 10 minutes later. Nick Fury stepped out. He looked the same way he always did in my memory. Calm. Straight-backed. No wasted movement. Dark coat. Eye patch. Expression unreadable but alert. He scanned the lot, then his gaze locked onto us immediately. We walked in. The diner smelled like coffee and fried food. A couple families ate quietly. A few truck drivers sat near the counter. A waitress moved between tables, not paying us much attention. Fury chose a booth near the back where he could see the entrance. I sat across from him. Steve slid in beside me, not cramped but close enough that we were clearly together. Fury's eyes moved to Steve and stayed there for a moment. Steve met his gaze directly. No fear. No hostility. Just a steady, watchful look. Fury spoke first. Captain. Steve's voice was controlled. Director. Fury's eyebrows lifted slightly at that. You know who I am. Steve nodded once. Alex told me. Fury's eyes flicked to me. Alex. Hey, I said cheerfully. Fury did not smile. You're not on any list I've seen. I'm new, I replied. Fury's gaze dropped to my ring, then to Steve's ring. His expression didn't shift much, but the attention sharpened. You gave him one. I did, I said. Fury's voice stayed level. Explain. I leaned back slightly and kept my tone plain. The ring makes energy constructs. Barriers, restraints, tools. It responds to willpower and focus. It's not a gun, and it's not something you can just take and use. Fury looked at Steve. Can you use it? Steve raised his ring hand and formed a simple square above the table. It hovered cleanly. Then he let it dissolve. Fury watched without flinching. Then he said, "That's an asset." Steve's expression tightened. "I'm not an asset." Fury's gaze stayed on him. "That's what I call anything that can protect people." Steve didn't argue beyond a firm look. That was Steve too. He didn't get dragged into word fights. He set the boundary and stayed there. I spoke again, friendly. "He's not joining your agency." Fury's eyes moved to me. "You're not in charge of him." "No," I said. "He decides. But you're not putting him in a cage." "That's what I'm here for." Fury stared at me for a moment, then shifted to practical questions. "Where was he?" Fury asked. "North," I said. "Ice." Fury's gaze narrowed. "Coordinates?" "No," I replied. Fury didn't like that, but he didn't pretend he did. "Medical check." Steve spoke, calm and firm. "I'll see a doctor when I choose. Not in a facility where people can lock doors." Fury studied him, then nodded slightly, like he accepted that as the best he would get today. "What do you want from me?" Fury asked. "Nothing," I said. "I wanted you to know he's alive and not missing. And I wanted you to understand you don't own him." Fury's voice stayed low. "This world is different than the one you left." Steve's face tightened briefly, then he said, "I already noticed." Fury's gaze moved to the duffel bag near Steve's feet. Shield. Steve didn't move it, but he didn't deny it either. Yes. Fury looked back at me. Latern Corps. Yeah, I replied. What's your purpose? Fury asked. Helping where things get dangerous, I said, simple. Not replacing what exists. Not taking control. Fury watched me like he was deciding if he believed any of it. Then he shifted again. I'll keep this quiet for now, Fury said. But you can't keep him hidden forever. We're not trying to hide forever, I said. We're giving him time. Fury glanced at Steve. You want time? Steve nodded once. Yes. Fury held that for a moment, then said, You'll contact me again. I might, I replied. Fury's expression hardened slightly. That wasn't a request. I smiled, still relaxed. We'll see. Steve's eyes flicked to me like he didn't love that tone. He didn't scold me. He just watched, disciplined. Fury stood. I have what I need for today. I stood too. Steve rose with me. Fury's gaze stayed on Steve. If you want help, ask. Don't wait until you're cornered. Steve answered honestly. I don't plan to be cornered. Fury nodded once, then walked out without another word. We left a few minutes later, no scene, no attention. Back in the car, Steve stared out the window for a while. He's not wrong, he said eventually, voice quiet. About what? I asked. About the world being different, Steve replied. I nodded. Yeah. He glanced at his ring hand. And about this making people interested. Also yeah, I said. Steve looked at me, serious. So we keep it controlled. Exactly, I replied, cheerful again. You're already getting it. When we returned to the cabin, Steve immediately went back into training mode like meeting Fury hadn't shaken him. He did 20 minutes of basic shapes, then practiced restraints on a chair, keeping pressure consistent. He didn't complain. He didn't drift. He was steady. I watched him for a while, then made the next move. Peter Parker. I waited until Steve was resting and eating again, then I told him I was heading out for a day. I'll be back, I said. Steve looked up from his water bottle. Where are you going? Queens, I replied. He frowned. Why? To talk to someone, I said. Someone important, Steve said, catching on. Yeah, I replied. Steve nodded once. Be careful. I'm always careful, I said, smiling. Steve's expression stayed serious. You're cheerful. That's not the same thing. I laughed quietly. Fair. I left. Queens felt familiar the moment I stepped off the train. Same street noise. Same mix of people. Same sense that life here kept going regardless of who was building weapons in Malibu or running agencies in secret. I walked to Midtown High and waited near the edge of the student flow when the day ended. Peter came out with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked a little different now. Not physically obvious, but there was a restless energy in the way he moved, like his body had started doing things his mind wasn't caught up with yet. He nearly collided with a girl as he stepped off the curb, then caught himself too fast, too clean. He blinked, like he noticed it again. I stepped toward him, friendly. Hey! Peter turned quickly, startled, then recognized me. His shoulders dropped a little in relief. Oh, he said. Hey, Alex. Been a minute, I said cheerfully. Yeah, Peter replied, awkward but not unfriendly. I've been busy. I can tell, I said, still light. Peter shifted his backpack strap, then glanced around like he was checking who might be watching. So, what are you doing here? I nodded. Down the street. Walking you home. Or at least part of the way. Peter blinked. Why? Because I want to talk, I said. Not on the sidewalk in front of your school. Peter hesitated, then nodded. Okay. We walked. Peter kept glancing at his hands like he was trying not to, then failing. After a couple blocks, I spoke calmly. You've noticed changes. Peter stopped walking. He stared at me. What? I stopped too, keeping my posture casual. You're stronger than you should be. Faster. Your balance is weirdly good. Stuff like that. Peter's face flushed. How do you know that? Because I've been watching, I said plainly, not creepy, just direct. Peter's eyes widened. That's... Yeah, I said quickly, still friendly. I know how that sounds. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because you're important. Peter swallowed. His voice dropped. Is this about Oscorp? I nodded once. Yes. Peter's eyes went even wider. His breathing sped up slightly. I didn't. He started, then stopped, like he didn't know what he was allowed to say. I kept it simple. You got bit. Peter's mouth opened, then closed. How do you? I know, I said. And I'm not telling anyone. Peter looked like he was trying to decide whether to run. His feet shifted slightly. His hands curled, then unclenched. I raised my hands a little, calm. I'm not a cop. I'm not a scientist. I'm not here to drag you into a lab. I'm here to offer you something. Peter stared at me, tense. What? I slid my right hand out of my pocket and let him see the green ring clearly. Peter's eyes locked on it immediately. What is that? He asked, voice tight. Lantern ring, I said. Peter blinked. Like Green Lantern. Yeah, I replied. Peter stared at it like he couldn't decide if it was a prank. That's not real. It is, I said calmly. I lifted my hand and formed a small green cube above my palm. Nothing huge. Nothing dramatic. Just clear and stable. Peter's mouth dropped open. He leaned forward a little without meaning to. Oh my God! I smiled, amused by how honest his reaction was. Yep. Peter's eyes flicked between the cube and my face. How are you doing that? Ring, I said. And focus. Peter swallowed. Then, because he was Peter, his fear turned into fast questions. Is it alien? He asked quickly. Is it tech? Is it like nanotech? Is it? It's not Stark tech, I said, cutting in gently. And yes, it's alien in origin. Peter's eyes widened again. Oh my God! I let the cube dissolve and kept my tone friendly. I'm building an organization here. Latern Corp. People with rings who follow rules. Peter stared at me. Rules. I nodded. No hurting innocent people. No using it for money. No showing off. No telling the world. Peter looked like he wanted to argue about the last one, then he stopped and just nodded, fast. Okay. Okay. I tilted my head slightly. I want you to meet someone. Peter blinked. Who? Steve Rogers, I said. Peter's eyes went huge. Captain America is dead. I smiled slightly. Not anymore. Peter stared at me like his brain was overloading. That's impossible. It's not, I said. Peter swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the kind of person who won't use power like a bully, I said simply. And because your life is about to get complicated. Peter's face tightened. It already is. I know, I said. Peter hesitated, then asked, "Are you going to hurt my aunt?" "No," I said immediately, serious now. "Never." Peter's shoulders eased slightly. He nodded once. "Okay. Come with me," I said. Peter looked torn, then nodded again. "Okay." I kept the trip normal. No flying. No glowing trail. We took the train. Peter was jumpy the entire time, eyes scanning everything. He couldn't stop moving his fingers like he wanted to do something with them. He kept whispering questions that he didn't finish out loud. I stayed cheerful through it, answering what I could without dumping everything on him at once. At the cabin, I unlocked the door and stepped inside first. Steve was in the main room, doing a slow repetition drill with a hovering square. He turned immediately, alert, hand moving toward the duffel where the shield stayed. He froze when he saw Peter behind me. Peter froze too. Steve's expression was sharp and guarded. "Who is that?" "A kid from Queens," I said cheerfully. "Peter Parker." Peter stared at Steve's face like he was trying to compare it to every photo he'd ever seen. "You're Peter," started, voice cracking slightly. "You're Captain America." Steve's eyes narrowed. "Yes." Peter's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like he was about to explode with excitement and fear at the same time. I held up a hand, calm. "Steve, he's safe." Steve looked at me. "You trust him?" "Yes," I said. Steve's jaw tightened, then he nodded once, slow. "All right." Peter stepped forward a half step, then stopped himself, awkward. "Hi," he said, nervous. Steve's voice was steady. "Hello." I pointed at Steve's hand. "He's already part of the Latern Corps." Peter's eyes snapped to Steve's ring. "You have one too." Steve lifted his hand slightly, cautious, and formed a small square, then let it dissolve. Peter made a noise that was half laugh, half gasp. "This is insane." "It's real," I said, still light. Steve watched Peter closely. "Why is he here?" I looked at Peter. "Tell him." Peter swallowed. "I got bit at Oscorp." Steve's expression shifted. Not confusion, not disbelief. Just immediate focus. "Bit by what?" "A spider," Peter said quickly, then hesitated. "I didn't tell anyone." "I didn't, I swear." Steve nodded once, accepting the urgency. "And now you're changing." Peter nodded fast. "Yes. And it's weird. I can stick to things and I'm stronger and I don't know what I can do yet." Steve glanced at me. "You knew?" "Yeah," I said. Steve's face tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. He looked back at Peter. "Do you understand you need to be careful?" Peter nodded so fast his hair moved. "Yes. I'm trying." I smiled faintly. That was Peter. Terrified, excited, trying to be responsible, not always succeeding. I stepped closer and spoke plainly. "Peter, I'm building the Latern Corps. I'm asking if you want to join." Peter didn't hesitate. His eyes lit up, his shoulders lifting like he couldn't hold the energy in. "Yes," he said immediately, voice high with excitement. "Yes. Absolutely. Yes." Steve's eyebrows lifted slightly at that reaction. He didn't look annoyed. He looked like he was adjusting to it. I smiled, amused. "All right." Peter's hands were shaking slightly. This is crazy. This is like language," Steve said automatically, firm but not angry. Peter snapped his mouth shut, then nodded quickly. Sorry. Yes. Yes. I held up my hand. Before I give you a ring, rules again. Peter nodded hard. Okay. No showing off, I said. No telling people. Not Aunt May, not your friends, not your school. Peter's excitement dipped for half a second, then he nodded. Okay. No using it for revenge, I said. Peter's face tightened briefly at the thought of Flash, then he nodded again. Okay. No hurting innocent people, I said. Peter looked offended by the idea. I wouldn't. I know, I said, still calm. I'm saying it anyway. Peter nodded. Okay. Steve watched him closely, then said, if you're in this, you train. Peter snapped his gaze to Steve. Yes. Yes, sir. Steve's expression tightened, like he didn't like being called that, but he let it slide. I opened my palm and let the ring project a second green ring. Clean. New. Stable. Peter stared at it like it was the best thing he'd ever seen. I held it out. Take it. Peter reached with both hands, then stopped himself and used one, careful. He took it like it might vanish if he moved too fast. His eyes were wide. His face was flushed. He looked thrilled and terrified. Put it on, I said gently. Whatever finger feels right. Peter swallowed and slid it onto his right hand, index finger, fast like he couldn't stand waiting. A clean green pulse flashed through the cabin, bright but controlled, then settled. Peter gasped and laughed at the same time. He lifted his hand and stared at it like it was a miracle. Oh my God, he whispered. Oh my God. Steve watched him, serious. Breathe. Peter nodded quickly, inhaled, exhaled, then looked at me with eyes shining. What do I do? What do I do first? I smiled. First lesson. Make a line. 6 inches. Peter's excitement didn't vanish, but he tried to focus. His brows furrowed. His breathing slowed. A green glow formed above his palm. A line appeared. It was crooked, but it appeared instantly and held steady without flicker. Steve's eyes narrowed slightly, noticing the control. Peter stared at the line and then squeaked, unable to help himself. I did it. Good, I said cheerfully. Now hold it for 5 seconds. Peter did, eyes locked, mouth open in concentration. Steve's expression stayed guarded, but there was a small shift in it, a recognition that Peter's mind was fast and his control was unusually clean for someone who had just put the ring on. Peter let the line dissolve and looked up, beaming. Can I make a web? No, Steve said immediately. Peter blinked. What? Steve's tone was firm. Train first. Peter looked at me like he wanted backup. I smiled and shrugged. He's right. Peter groaned softly, then nodded. Okay. I clapped my hands once, light. All right. 2 lanterns in the cabin. This is going to be loud. Steve glanced at me. Keep him focused. I will, I said. Peter bounced slightly on his feet without meaning to, then tried to stand still and failed. This is so cool. Steve's voice stayed steady. Focus. Peter snapped straight again. Yes. Sorry. I pointed at the table. Lift the bottle. 3 inches. Peter looked at the bottle, then raised his hand. A small platform formed under it instantly, cleaner than Steve's first attempt had been. The bottle rose 3 inches and hovered, barely swaying. Peter's jaw dropped. That's. Hold, Steve said. Peter held it. His breathing slowed. The platform stayed stable. Steve's eyes narrowed further. Set it down. Peter lowered it gently and set it down without a clink. Steve looked at me. He learns fast. I know, I said, quiet satisfaction flickering in my chest for a moment before I smoothed it down. Peter looked between us, grinning like he'd just been handed the world. Am I doing it right? Right enough, Steve said, blunt. Peter nodded quickly. Okay. I leaned back against the counter, smiling. Welcome to the Latern Corps, Peter. Peter's grin widened even more. Yes. Chapter 7, Workshop Lights and Old Symbols. Peter did not want me to leave. He tried to pretend he was fine with it, but his face gave him away the second I mentioned Tony Stark. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, and he looked like he had 10 questions stacked on top of each other and no idea which one to ask first. Tony Stark, Peter said quickly. Like, the Tony Stark? Yes, I replied cheerfully. Steve stood near the table, arms relaxed at his sides, watching Peter with that steady patience he used when someone was about to talk themselves into a mistake. His ring sat quiet on his hand, not glowing. Peter looked at Steve like he wanted permission to freak out. Steve's expression stayed serious. You're not coming. Peter blinked. I wasn't, I just. Train, Steve said, firm. Peter's shoulders dropped a little. He nodded, then tried to recover his enthusiasm into something controlled. It didn't fully work. I will, Peter said quickly. I will train. If you meet him, can you tell him I said hi? I smiled. No. Peter's face fell. Why? Because you're 15 and you'll explode, I said, still light. Also because you're not part of his life. Peter opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. He nodded, frustrated but listening. Steve looked at me. We leave now? I nodded. Yeah. Peter stood there, vibrating with contained energy. Okay, he said. Okay. I'm going to train. I'm going to do lines and squares and boring stuff. Good, Steve replied. Peter swallowed and tried to smile. Be safe. I waved a hand casually. Always. Steve didn't wave. He just nodded once, a soldier's version of reassurance. I grabbed my jacket, checked that my ring was covered by a glove, and headed out with Steve. We traveled the way I preferred. Normal. Plane ticket bought under a quiet name. No glowing flight trail across the sky. No sudden appearance in the middle of someone's private space unless it was necessary. Steve sat by the window on the plane, posture straight, hands resting on his thighs. He watched the clouds, then the wing, then the ground when it came into view. He didn't talk much. He was absorbing details the way he always did, building a working map of a world he didn't recognize yet. When we landed, I led us through the airport without drawing attention. Steve moved like someone trained to blend in. He didn't stare. He didn't look lost. He matched the flow and kept his face neutral. Outside, I rented a car and drove. As the coastline opened up and the houses got bigger and farther apart, Steve glanced at me. Stark, he said. Yeah, I replied. Steve's jaw tightened slightly. He's already building armor. Yeah, I said. He's busy. Steve looked forward again. You trust him? I trust him to care when it counts, I said, still calm. I don't trust him to be polite. Steve's mouth tightened faintly, like he understood that category of person. We reached the property line in the late afternoon. Last time, I had walked in alone. Today, I made it even more boring. I approached through the main drive like someone who had an appointment. The ring helped with the cameras, nudging attention away from details without tripping alarms. Not hacking. Not disabling. Just smoothing perception enough that we didn't get swarmed by security before we hit the front. As we walked, Steve's gaze kept moving, not paranoid, just aware. He didn't touch his duffel. He didn't put his hand on his ring. He stayed ready without looking aggressive. Inside the main building, the air was clean and cool. Sunlight poured through glass walls. Ocean sound drifted faintly through the structure, low and constant. We reached the workshop entrance. I heard Tony's voice before we stepped in. J.A.R.V.I.S, if you tell me thermal load one more time, I'm unplugging you and going back to dumb computers, Tony said, irritated. I would not recommend that, sir, Jarvis replied calmly. Your safety margin is already insufficient. Tony muttered something under his breath that I didn't repeat. I stepped through the threshold first, hands open and relaxed. Tony turned immediately. His expression shifted fast. Recognition first, then annoyance. Then his gaze slid past me to Steve. Tony froze. He stared like his brain refused to accept what his eyes were reporting. His mouth opened slightly. His eyebrows lifted. For a full second, he looked genuinely stunned. Then he recovered in the way Tony Stark always recovered, by making it sound like he wasn't bothered. No, Tony said slowly, voice dry. That's not real. Steve stood still, calm, posture straight. Tony took a step closer, staring harder. Okay. Either I'm hallucinating, or somebody is doing the world's most expensive cosplay. Steve's voice was controlled. Tony Stark. Tony blinked once, then gave a sharp, incredulous laugh that sounded half amused and half defensive. He talks. Steve didn't react. Yes. Tony's eyes flicked to me. Is this you? I smiled cheerfully. Hi again. Tony's gaze snapped back to Steve. Captain America is dead. Steve's face tightened slightly. Not anger. Not offense. Just the tension of hearing that stated so casually. I was frozen, Steve replied, plain. Tony stared, then looked around the room like he expected a hidden camera crew. Okay. Great. Cool. Frozen. Like a popsicle. Steve said nothing. Tony's eyes flicked down and caught the faint green ring on Steve's hand. Then his gaze slid to my ring. Tony's expression changed. Less disbelief, more interest. That's the same thing. Yep, I said. Tony's shoulders dropped a fraction, like he had just accepted that today was not going to be normal. So you brought Captain America to my house to sell me a ring. I brought him, I said, because you asked why you should trust me. Tony stared at me. I did not ask that. You did with your face, I replied. Tony opened his mouth, then shut it, then pointed at Steve. So he's with you. Latern Corp. Steve's voice stayed even. Yes. Tony exhaled slowly and rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. Okay. Great. Super. This is happening. He dropped his hand and looked directly at Steve, eyes sharp again. If you're really Steve Rogers, then you know I'm not exactly in the trusting strangers phase of my life. Steve's reply was immediate and calm. I don't expect you to trust me. Tony's gaze narrowed. He looked like he didn't know what to do with that kind of answer. I stepped forward a little, keeping it relaxed. We're not here to argue. We're here to offer. Tony folded his arms. Offer what? I lifted my hand slightly and let a simple green construct form above my palm. A small, stable ring-shaped outline, rotating slowly. Tony's eyes tracked it automatically. Still not a projector. Nope, I said. Tony glanced to the side. J.A.R.V.I.S, run scans. Already in progress, sir, JARVIS replied. Tony stared at the floating construct, then at my ring. So you can make objects out of energy? Yes, I said. Tony's gaze slid to Steve's ring again. And he can too. Steve raised his hand slightly and formed a flat barrier, then dismissed it. Controlled. Clean. Tony's mouth twitched, like he was fighting between excitement and suspicion. Okay. That's interesting. I lowered my hand. Still want to say no. Tony opened his mouth, then paused. He looked back at Steve. Let's say I believe you're real. Steve's eyes stayed steady. All right. Tony's voice sharpened. Why are you doing this? Why come to me at all? I answered before Steve could. Because you're going to keep building armor no matter what anyone says. You're going to keep stepping into situations that get people killed. You're going to try to fix problems with engineering because that's what you do. Tony's eyes narrowed hard at that. You don't know what I'm going to do. I smiled lightly. I know what kind of person you are right now. Steve didn't look surprised by my wording, but he watched Tony closely. If Tony got aggressive, Steve would respond, but he wasn't baiting anything. Tony pointed at the center of his chest where the arc reactor sat under his shirt. I'm already doing my thing. I don't need a glowing ring in a recruitment pitch. Then don't join, I said, casual. But you can still use it. Tony's expression tightened. Use it how? I opened my palm and let a second ring form, clean and new, glowing faintly. I kept it small, stable, and non-threatening. Tony stared at it. His eyes moved fast, analyzing shape, material behavior, energy output. He took a half step closer, not touching yet. What's the catch? Tony asked. No catch, I replied. Rules still apply, but you already have your own rules, even if you pretend you don't. Tony scoffed softly. I don't pretend. Steve finally spoke, calm and firm. You do. Tony snapped his gaze to Steve like he didn't appreciate being called out. Then he stared for a second longer and the edge of his mouth moved like he almost smiled. Okay, Tony said. Captain America is judging me in my workshop. That's new. Steve didn't respond. He didn't get dragged into banter. Tony looked back at the ring in my palm. So if I put that on, I'm in your core. Yes, I said. Tony hesitated. And it runs on willpower. Yes, I said again. Tony pointed at me. That sounds like you're saying it runs on motivational posters. I laughed softly. Yeah, I get it. It sounds dumb. It still works. Tony's eyes flicked to Steve's ring. And it works for him. Yes, I replied. Tony's expression became more serious. And you gave this to him. Just like that. He earned it, I said. Tony stared. How? Steve answered simply. By choosing restraint. Tony's gaze tightened. That's vague. Steve didn't elaborate. Tony looked back at me. You're really just handing out rings to people. Not to people, I corrected. To you. To him. To Peter. Tony's head snapped slightly. Peter who? Peter Parker, I said. Tony stared. That is an extremely normal name. Yeah, I said cheerfully. He's not normal. Tony's eyes narrowed. You're building a team. Yes, I replied. Tony paced 2 steps, then turned back to me. Okay. Let's say I'm interested. I'm not putting it on my finger. Steve's expression shifted slightly, like he was evaluating that. I stayed relaxed. You don't have to. Tony's eyes sharpened. I'll put it in my suit. I blinked once. You want to integrate a ring interface into armor? Tony nodded, already mentally building it. If it's a power tool, I want it connected to my systems. I want it measurable. I want it controlled through my HUD. I want to see what it's doing when it's doing it. Steve spoke, cautious. It's not a machine. Tony looked at Steve like he'd heard that before. Everything's a machine if you understand it. Steve's voice stayed steady. That mindset gets people hurt. Tony's expression tightened, then he exhaled and waved a hand. Yet. I held the ring out, still open palm, letting Tony decide. Tony stared at it for a long second. His face was serious now. Not joking. He reached out slowly, then stopped. J.A.R.V.I.S, Tony said, if I put this thing in my suit, is it going to eat my reactor or explode my house? I have insufficient data to answer definitively, sir, Jarvis replied. However, the energy signature appears stable and does not resemble known explosive compounds. Tony squinted. That is not comforting. I smiled. It's also not wrong. Tony took a breath and reached out again. This time he took the ring, holding it between his fingers the way a scientist handled something that could be dangerous but interesting. He turned it over, watching the glow. It's warm. Yeah, I said. Tony's eyes lifted to mine. This is not standard physics. No, I replied. Tony looked at Steve. So you trust this guy? Steve's answer was simple. Yes. Tony stared at him. Why? Steve didn't hesitate. Because he didn't force me. He explained. He gave me time. He treated me like a person. Tony's expression tightened in a way that looked like discomfort. He didn't like hearing that because it implied he expected the opposite. Tony looked back down at the ring. Okay. He walked toward a workbench and set the ring down gently, like he didn't want to scratch it or trigger something. Sir, Jarvis said, your heart rate has increased. Tony's head snapped up. No, it hasn't. It has, Jarvis replied. Tony pointed upward. Stop snitching. I laughed quietly. Steve's face stayed neutral, but his posture eased slightly. Not relaxed, just less braced. Tony leaned over the bench and pulled a magnifier toward him. He studied the ring closely, eyes moving fast. No seams. No obvious battery compartment. No microfabrication markings. He glanced up at me. You made this. The ring made it, I corrected. Tony frowned. That is not an answer. It's the answer you're getting, I said. Tony huffed quietly, then reached for a small scanner and ran it over the ring. Data flashed across a nearby monitor. Unknown energy spectrum, Tony muttered. Not electromagnetic. Not plasma. Not. He stopped himself and looked at me again. If I put this in my suit, can I still make constructs? Yes, I said. If you can interface your intent properly. Tony's eyes narrowed. Intent. Focus, I said, simplifying. Your suit can help you stabilize. It won't replace the part that's you. Tony leaned back slightly, hands on the edge of the bench. So this is partly psychological. It's partly disciplined, Steve said. Tony looked annoyed at the word. Same thing. Steve's reply was immediate. Not the same thing. Tony stared at him, then looked away like he didn't want to argue with Captain America about definitions. I kept it practical. If you want it in the suit, you can do that. But you still need to train. Just like you train to fly without killing yourself. Tony's expression tightened. I didn't train. I iterated. I grinned. That's training with extra ego. Steve glanced at me like he was deciding if that was helpful. Tony's mouth twitched slightly. Okay. Funny. So what, you're my trainer now? No, I said. I'm the person who gave you a tool. You can decide how serious you take it. Tony's face shifted into a look of reluctant acceptance. I'll take it serious enough not to blow up my garage. That's a good start, I said. Tony picked up the ring again and held it up at eye level. Does it come with a badge? No, I said. Tony sighed dramatically. Missed opportunity. Steve's voice stayed calm. You're going to put it in your suit? Tony nodded. Yes. Steve's eyes narrowed slightly. If you abuse it. Tony cut in, sharp but controlled. I'm not going to go rob a bank with it, if that's what you're worried about. Steve held his gaze. I'm worried about you using it like a weapon without thinking. Tony's face tightened. He looked away briefly, then back. I think. Steve didn't move. You rationalize. Tony stared at him for a long second. Then Tony exhaled, slow, and his voice lowered slightly. Okay. Fine. Point taken. Steve didn't press further. Tony looked back at me. So am I officially a Latern? If you accept the rules, I said. Tony rolled his eyes. Rules? Yes, I said, still cheerful. Rules. Tony lifted the ring slightly. No killing innocents, no money scams, no public showboating. Yeah, I said. And you don't hand it off to someone else. Tony's eyes narrowed. I wouldn't. Good, I said. Then yes. Tony nodded once, short and firm. Fine. Sure. Steve watched him closely. You're agreeing quickly. Tony glanced at Steve. Because if I don't, I'm going to think about it for 2 days and then do something stupid out of curiosity. This way, I do the stupid thing with supervision. I smiled. That's honest. Tony's mouth twitched. Don't get used to it. Tony turned toward the center of the workshop and clapped his hands once. J.A.R.V.I.S, bring up suit integration models. I want an internal housing for the ring that doesn't interfere with the arc reactor or my repulsors. Also, make sure it's shielded from whatever the hell this energy is. Understood, sir, JARVIS replied. Would you like to begin with the Mark II or Mark III chassis layout? Tony looked at the nearest monitor. Mark III. Always Mark III. Steve's eyes moved over the workshop, the mechanical arms, the screens, the half-built parts. His expression stayed serious. He looked like he didn't like how much power one man could build alone. Tony noticed Steve watching and snorted softly. Yeah. I know. It's a lot. Steve's voice was flat. It is. Tony didn't take offense. He just nodded slightly, like he accepted that. I stayed near the bench, letting Tony do what Tony did. He moved fast, hands confident, mind racing. He sketched quick housing concepts, then tossed them out. He asked JARVIS for measurements, then corrected them. He pulled open a compartment and started assembling a prototype mount. At one point, he paused and looked at Steve again. So, Tony said, voice casual but edged with real curiosity, how are you alive? Steve's answer was short. I crashed. I went into the ice. I woke up. Tony stared. That is the least detailed explanation I've ever heard. Steve's gaze stayed steady. It's the truth. Tony blinked, then shook his head as if he couldn't believe he was having this conversation. Okay. Great. America's Ghost is in my shop while I install a space ring into a robot suit. Steve's expression didn't change. Armor. Tony frowned. Excuse me. It's armor, Steve repeated, calm. Tony stared at him, then looked at me. He's already correcting my vocabulary. I smiled. That's Steve. Tony went back to work, muttering to himself. Armor. Sure. Whatever. It's still a suit. As he worked, his tone shifted slightly into something more grounded. Less showmanship. More focus. Does it ever run out? Tony asked without looking up. It has a charge limit, I said. Training matters. Tony nodded. Can it recharge? It can, I said. Method matters. Tony's eyes narrowed. That sounds like you're avoiding details. I'm keeping it simple, I replied. Tony huffed. I hate simple. Steve spoke, calm. You need simple. Tony paused, then gave a short exhale that sounded like a reluctant agreement. Yeah. Fine. After an hour of prototype work, Tony held up a small housing frame he'd assembled. It was sleek, compact, and designed to clamp onto internal suit structure without interfering with major systems. He slid the ring into it and locked it gently. The ring's glow remained steady. Tony's eyes brightened slightly. Okay. It likes that. I nodded. It's stable. Tony looked up at me. If this works, I can route construct projection through my repulsor aiming system. Steve's eyes narrowed again. Don't turn it into a gun. Tony rolled his eyes. It's not a gun. It's a tool. Tools can look like guns. Steve didn't laugh. That's still a gun. Tony sighed and held up both hands. Okay. Fine. No giant green cannons. Happy? Steve's voice stayed flat. Not what I said. Tony stared at him. You're exhausting. Steve's expression stayed neutral. Good. Tony blinked, then barked a short laugh despite himself. It wasn't friendly, exactly, but it was real. I kept my tone light. You two are going to be fun. Tony looked at me. Don't encourage this. Steve didn't respond. He just watched Tony's hands and the ring's housing. He wasn't trying to control Tony. He was watching for recklessness. Tony stepped toward a Mark III frame and opened a chest panel. The arc reactor housing sat centered, glowing faintly. He moved carefully, not sloppy. Even with all his ego, Tony treated his own life support system with respect. He slid the ring housing into a secondary compartment, locking it down with a mechanical click. He tightened a couple fasteners and stepped back. J.A.R.V.I.S., Tony said, run power flow checks. Make sure I'm not about to turn myself into fireworks. Running diagnostics, JARVIS replied. Tony looked at me while he waited. So that's it. I'm in. Yep, I said. Tony's expression shifted into cautious seriousness. If this has side effects. It doesn't mess with your brain, I said. It responds to you. If you're sloppy, output gets sloppy. That's the risk. Tony nodded once. Okay. Steve added, calm but firm. And you don't hide behind it. Tony glanced at him. Hide behind what? The ring, Steve said. You already hide behind jokes. Don't add another layer. Tony stared for a moment. His face tightened slightly, then he looked away and pretended he hadn't heard it. Diagnostics complete, Jarvis said. No instability detected. The new component does not interfere with the arc reactor or repulsor systems at idle. Tony's eyes sharpened. At idle. So under load, we might explode. Under load, we lack sufficient data, Jarvis replied. Tony grinned tightly. Perfect. That's my favorite kind of data. Steve's eyes narrowed. Tony. Tony held up a hand. I'm not testing it right now. Steve didn't relax much, but he accepted the delay. Tony looked at me again. So, leader of the Latern Corps. Are we doing a meeting? A handshake? A membership card? No, I said, smiling. You're good. Tony scoffed softly. Low effort organization. High standards, I corrected. Tony's mouth twitched. Okay. Fine. He stepped closer and extended a hand, then hesitated like he wasn't sure if that was expected. Steve watched without moving. I shook Tony's hand. Welcome. Tony nodded once, then pulled his hand back and immediately turned to his tools, as if that kept him from feeling anything about what just happened. Steve glanced at me. We're leaving. I nodded. Yet. Tony looked up, distracted. Already? Yes, I said. You'll call if you need something. Tony's tone stayed casual. I don't call. You will, I replied. Tony stared at me, then snorted. We'll see. Steve and I left without drama. Outside, the ocean air hit my face again. I exhaled slowly, feeling a small flicker of relief that I kept contained. Tony having a ring, even integrated, changed the shape of a lot of possibilities. It didn't replace his arc. It didn't fix his personality. It just gave him another tool he could choose to use well or badly. Steve walked beside me, quiet. After a minute, he spoke. He's reckless. Yeah, I said. He's also serious underneath it, Steve added. Yeah, I said again, smiling faintly. Steve's gaze stayed forward. If he hurts people with that ring, I'll handle it, I said, still calm. Steve nodded once. We reached the car. I opened the door and got in. Steve paused before he got in, looking out at the property as if he was trying to understand what kind of world produced a man like Tony Stark and trusted him with power anyway. Then he got in and shut the door, posture straight, eyes forward, ready to move. Chapter 8, Diagnostics, First Use, and a Cabin Door. I stayed outside the property line longer than Steve liked. He did not say it at first. He just sat in the passenger seat with his hands resting on his thighs, eyes forward, posture straight. His calm looked natural on him, but I could read the small tells now. The way his jaw set. The way his gaze kept drifting toward the rearview mirror. The way he breathed through his nose, steady, controlled. Tony Stark was not a man Steve trusted. Steve had reasons. Tony had reasons too. I kept my tone light anyway because that was how I operated when nobody was dying. We're just watching. No need to glare a hole through the dashboard. Steve's eyes flicked toward me, then back ahead. I'm not. Yes, you are, I said cheerfully. It's fine. He didn't argue. He just sat there and kept doing it. I parked on a turnout a short drive away, far enough that we weren't obvious, close enough that I could keep a clean read. The ring helped. It didn't need to light up. It just fed me quiet information when I asked for it. I looked down at my gloved hand, then up toward the direction of the house. Tony's ring was now inside his suit. That mattered. He would test it. He could not resist. Tony's curiosity was a moving object. It hit things until they made sense. The question wasn't if he would test it. It was how safely. Steve shifted slightly. You said you're not going to step in unless it goes wrong. Yeah, I replied. And what counts as wrong? He asked. I glanced at him. His tone was level, but his eyes were sharp. Wrong is, the suit starts failing, he loses control, he tries to use it on people, or he panics, I said. If he's just being loud in his workshop, that's normal. Steve's mouth tightened faintly. He's always loud. Exactly, I said. I leaned back in my seat and let the ring's awareness stretch just enough to catch the signature I needed. Not a giant scan. Not a searchlight across the coastline. Just a narrow focus. There it was. A pulse. Not mine. Not Steve's. Tony's. It wasn't the same as when a ring sat on a finger. It was dampened and filtered through metal and systems, like the ring's output was trying to adapt to the suit's framework. Tony really had mounted it in there. I let out a quiet breath and smiled without meaning to. It felt strange seeing it applied like this in a universe that didn't have it built in. Strange, but it worked. Steve noticed the shift in my expression. What? He's about to start, I replied. We waited. A minute later, the ring signature spiked sharply, then stabilized. Inside the workshop, Tony had turned something on. I pictured him in my head easily. Standing in front of the suit frame. Hands moving fast. Talking to Jarvis like Jarvis was annoying him on purpose. Probably making a face at his own screen while trying not to look too excited. Then the first real construct formed. I felt it through the ring's spectrum like a clean event. Not my output. Tony's output. A broad, flat shape that held for a second, flickered, then tightened into stability. Steve's posture shifted. You feel it? Yeah, I said softly. He didn't ask how. He just watched the coastline like he could see through the hills. The construct's signature changed again, becoming narrower, denser, more focused. Tony was experimenting. He wasn't just making a square. He was testing output through the suit's systems, trying to route it like a repulsor beam or a hard light plate. The ring did not want to be treated like a machine. It responded, but it responded on its own terms. Tony could push, but only if he could keep his mind clean enough to handle both the suit and the ring at once. The signature wobbled. Then it snapped back into place. My eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay. Steve's voice stayed flat. That sounded like approval. It's more surprise, I said cheerfully. He's adapting fast. Steve didn't look pleased. That's not always good. No, I agreed. But it's useful. Another spike hit, sharper than before. This one had a distinct intent pattern. It wasn't a barrier. It was a grip. A clamp-like shape around an object. Tony was trying to pick something up without touching it. The construct held. Then the output dipped as if Tony's attention had split. The construct faltered. I felt a second energy surge from the suit's base systems, like the repulsors had kicked to compensate. Tony was reacting quickly, trying to cover a mistake. The construct stabilized again. Steve's jaw tightened. That's risky. Yeah, I said. I watched the pattern for another minute, reading it like a heartbeat. Tony wasn't out of control. He was just doing what Tony did, pushing the tool, then improvising when the tool pushed back. The ring signature eased down into a steadier rhythm. He'd either finished the first test or paused to review data. I exhaled and sat forward slightly. All right. Steve glanced at me. Now. Now, I replied. I drove back toward the property, keeping it clean and normal. No speed. No sudden stops. Just a guy pulling into a driveway like he belonged. Steve got out with me and adjusted his jacket once, eyes scanning the area. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man who kept his balance under stress. We approached the workshop entrance again. Inside, the sound of metal arms moving and tools clinking carried through the open space. Tony's voice cut through it. Okay, that's not nothing, Tony said, sounding half pleased and half annoyed. Jarvis replied calmly, your construct stability improved by 37% after you reduced simultaneous subsystem load. So I have to not do everything at once, Tony said. That's offensive. It is practical, Jarvis replied. I stepped in. Tony turned immediately, eyebrows lifting. Oh, he said. You're back. Steve followed me in, expression steady. Tony's eyes flicked to Steve and then back to me. Are you here to give me a report card? Sort of, I said cheerfully. How'd it go? Tony waved a hand toward the suit. It works. Mostly. It's weird. It doesn't behave like tech. It behaves like it has opinions. Steve's mouth tightened slightly. I nodded. That's accurate. Tony pointed at my ring. You could have warned me that it doesn't like being treated like a battery. I did warn you, I said. You just didn't like the words. Tony scoffed quietly. Fair. He stepped toward a monitor and swiped through data. Graphs and readouts filled the screen. I tried routing projection through the repulsor targeting system, Tony said, focused. It sort of works. The ring responds, but if I treat it like an output channel, it gets unstable. If I treat it like a second set of hands, it behaves. Steve spoke, calm. Because it's not a weapon. Tony glanced at him. Everything can be a weapon. Steve's expression didn't change. That doesn't mean everything should be used that way. Tony stared at Steve for half a second, then looked away like he didn't want to keep that conversation going. I kept my tone light. So you can use it? Tony nodded. Yeah. Without blowing yourself up, I added. Tony rolled his eyes. Barely. Jarvis corrected him immediately. Your suit remains within safe parameters, sir. Tony pointed at the ceiling. Stop defending me. It's weird. Steve's eyebrows lifted slightly at that exchange. Not amusement exactly, but he was processing the fact